A commonly debated topic amongst all Pokemon fans is, has Pokemon actually fallen off? With many people arguing that the newer generations of Pokemon don't hold up to the standards of the older games. This highly opinionated topic can quickly lead to aggravated aggression and arguments over what generation truly is the best in all of Pokemon. So, as the opinionated person I am, I have taken it upon myself to throw my hat into the ring. I am going to partake in a journey to play through all mainline Pokemon games from Generation 1 to Generation 9 that we currently have to prep myself for Pokemon Legends of ZA that is coming out within the next few days. Hopefully I get this upload out on time. What that means is, besides a few of the remakes, which I will be playing, by the way, I will be doing a full general synopsis of my playthrough of how I experienced these games, trying to remain as unbiased as I possibly can, meaning that in the beginning generation, no other generations exist. I'm only playing Gen 1 Pokemon as if it were the 90s all over again. Moving forward, when I'm playing through Gen 2, I can use Gen 1 as an example, but I will then be playing Generation 2 Pokemon, and trying to keep that unbiased mindset throughout the entirety of my journey, showcasing to you my true experience of these games. Again, outside of the remakes, which I truly believe don't really have much, Fire Red and Leaf Green is just updated graphics, Mega Ruby Alpha Sapphire only adds the Megas and such, and so on and so forth. So, focusing primarily on the mainstream games, I will be going through every single one, all version differences, of course. So red, blue, green, and yellow will be knocked off the board, and then I will move on to gold, silver, and crystal, and so on and so forth. You kind of get the picture. I assume you got it. I will then be ranking each of these in categories with a scaling of 0 to 10. Simple things as if they're tutorial, the starters, the Pokemon selection in general, the story, the battles, the grind, new mechanics, battle mechanics, item mechanics, all sorts of heaps. Obviously, some games that don't have those mechanics, like the Generation 1 games, won't have those categories, so the rankings might get a little skewed near the end, as I've done all the math already. I'm just doing the recording part now. And with that, I will be doing my best to once again treat it as if I am a 5-year-old little Timmy playing the Pokemon game for the very first time. So, I would like to remind everybody once again that I understand how opinionated this topic is, and I am just putting my opinion out there. If you wish to discuss, leave a comment down below. If you wish to hate on me, you can also comment down below. I'm in it for an argument or a debate. I'm petty. I don't care. Without further ado, let's go ahead and kick it off with Generation 1. Now, before we begin Generation 1, I need to make it very, very clear that I'm trying to treat these games as if the other generations don't exist, which I said at the beginning of this video. So, please do keep in mind that, albeit some of the rankings might look a little weird, because obviously a game that came out in the 90s isn't going to have any graphical comparison to a game that came out, like, recently, like Scarlet and Violet. Albeit some may argue Scarlet and Violet looks terrible compared to anything that was on the Game Boy. It is a amalgamation of science. If you were to show that game to somebody way back then, it would break their brain. So, I am trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who is playing this game for the first time when it came out, and remain in that unbiased state throughout my entire playthrough. So, some of my opinions may seem skewed because we are further along in the time period. So, please keep that in mind as I continue to talk about Pokemon Red and share my opinion on how I felt trying to play it for the first time. Of course, when I say red, I also mean red, blue, green, and yellow, so let's take it away. Now, where else do you start your Pokemon journey besides, well, the starters of the game, the very first choice that you get to make on your beginning journey throughout the world of Pokemon? With that being said, the Gen 1 starters are nothing to really drag home about. Obviously, a lot of their general inspiration are just the basic insects. Of course, you have a lizard, a turtle, and a frog, who then later evolve into a dragon, a bigger turtle, and a frog with a flower on its back. Of course, we can all agree that dragons are cool, and I'm not going to ever argue against that. Dragons are cool. I do think that there is a bit of charm to the simplicity, and of course, as I said, I can't just look at the future generations and see all the crazy styles and then compare it to this game's. So I would give this game starters a modest 7 out of 10. I think a lot of the Gen 1ers obviously have some personal attachment to these Pokemon because they probably were the very first Pokemon that these people have decided to pick for themselves. So it's very fair that among the mass majority of the older fan base, Charizard and Blastoise and Venusaur hold a special place in their hearts. However, in the grand scheme of things, they really just are the animals. There's not really much of the Pokemon monster aspect to it. They're just a lizard that breathes a little bit of fire, and honestly just a frog, if we're being honest, and then, like I said, the turtle part. So I believe a 7 out of 10 is honestly quite generous, but in the grand scheme of all the other Pokemon designs in this game, these are the overachievers. The rest of the dex is quite literally just lackluster. You've just got random rodents and bats and this and that, so you can't really be too harsh on this game because that's originally what Pokemon is about. So I think 7 out of 10 is extremely fair for the quality of Pokemon that they have, given when this game came out and what it was trying to accomplish. I'd like to go further into detail on the starters and specifically point out that I don't think any of these starters have a weakness in them, that being in the design situations. I think that each of them follow a progressive stage of evolution, like Bulbasaur actually being one of my favorite ones to showcase this, where he starts out as a little frog with the bulb, and then the bulb starts to bloom, and then he has the full flower on his back. That is an engaging evolutionary line that consistently progresses as it continues, which I think is really well done, given that this is the earlier games of Pokemon. Now, knowing what I know in the future, obviously, they get a little bit crazy with it, so I can enjoy the classics while they're here. I do ask that the Gen 1ers please don't beat me up on my way to my car tonight, as I will have to be walking through the parking lot, and give me a chance to explain in the future games and use this game as an example to showcase why I don't think that these are 10 out of 10 and masterpiece designs that will truly rival the ages. I do truly believe, having played this game 4 different times from red, blue, green, and yellow, that these games starter selection is just solid, good, pretty alright, 7 out of 10. That's about as far as it's going to go. So with enough rambling about the starter section, I'd like to move on to the next category, which is the tutorial. Now, I know this seems a little ridiculous, but in every single Pokemon game, the tutorials typically try to showcase the core mechanics of the game. Except for Generation 1, where you don't get one. Well, you kind of do. Professor Oak explains, the general goal of doing the Pokédex, sure, but that's it. Go figure it out for yourself. Press a bunch of buttons. The catching tutorial is skippable in some of the Generation 1 games, Yellow specifically, and the Green release if you're American. The Red and Blue one, it's not skippable, but in the Yellow and Green variations of the game, you can just click you're in a hurry and skip the drunk old man that's supposed to explain to you how you're supposed to catch your first Pokemon. You don't even get it explained to you how the health station works or the Pokemart. You're just told to go there and get a parcel from Professor Oak, and if you coincidentally talk to 1 or 2 random NPCs, they might give you some interior dialogue, but overall, I could see the average person playing this game and having no idea what's actually going on. You just get balls handed to you, and I know that's funny, but Pokeballs are just handed to you, and that's that. Go, Timmy, go. I'm surprised the average person in the 90s could even figure this out. And that's not a question to your intelligence. That's a showcase of how little was actually explained to the people who originally played these games. You were just given a bag and told to be home by the time the streetlights come out, which is, to be fair, very 90s coded. But in a gameplay aspect, a tutorial is the core value that teaches you what you are trying to achieve, and this game just doesn't do that. You are expected to blindly figure it out. So, as interesting as an idea that could possibly be, I'm gonna give this game's tutorial just a flat 0 out of 10, given that there isn't a tutorial. Enough clamoring about the tutorial, it's time to shift over to the next category, which will be the rival. Blue, Gary, what's his name? I forgot my grandson. He goes by many names, and to many people, honestly myself included, having just recently played through all of the games, I truly believe that Blue is arguably one of the best rivals in all of Pokemon, and that's quite shocking because he's probably only the best thing that these early generation games have going for them. He is an immediate threat to your ability to become champion, which is already showcased in your goals. He is consistently pushing you to do better, actively catches you off guard on random routes to challenge you to a battle. He just expects you to already be up to his level, and he is ready to bring it to you. I think that this douchey and demeanor isn't exactly required to be a rival. You can definitely be a goody two-shoes rival, which I will praise later on in the series. However, Gary gets it done. He is a constant reason for you, yes, you the player, to want to do better and continue your story throughout the entirety of Pokemon. I want to put that stupid idiot in his place, and the game makes sure that I know I'm supposed to beat him. And if I don't, that's that. He wins, we go on. Obviously, I said before, I'm not allowed to use the later generations as an example, but I'm going to key in a small little thing here. In some future generations of the game, if you lose to the rival, you just go to the Pokemon Center and redo it. If you lose to Gary, smell you later. And honestly, after the first loss to Gary, I'm definitely going to be smelling something later. Anyways, getting out of control here. I think that this is a perfectly nailed rival, and as I said, the best part of this game. He truly just gives you a reason to keep playing, which is what a rival is supposed to do. Push you to greater heights. Being that final champion at the end of the game really brings that full circle and allows you your final bout against him. If you lose, you have to earn that spot against him again by going through the Elite Four. You don't just get a happy-vampy pat on the back and go back in for a refight. No. You have to earn it every single time. And then when he finally loses in the grand scheme of things, it's not over for him. He wants to consistently improve because he wants you to be better, which is what a rival is supposed to do. So, with that and how much I have praised the rival, I'm going to be giving the rival score for this game a 10 out of 10, which, again, I know sounds incredibly generous for this being the earliest game. However, it's my opinion. So, with that out of the way, I am going to be transitioning into the story of the game. So, the story. It's, non-existent. I know I discussed just moments ago the rival and how that's the main core and how you are going to be the champion and such. But the story is about as existent as the tutorial. You walk out of Professor Oak's lab, you get an established rival, who is, again, the main core of that. You are told to go complete the Pokédex, and go. That's that. That's the entire introduction of what you're supposed to be doing throughout your journey, collecting Pokemon and becoming the champion. Throughout the rest of your journey is a series of unfortunate circumstances to where you randomly have to fight some Team Rocket grunts who are coincidentally in the same cave you need to go get insert badge number whatever, and some exposition is kind of given by the grunts, but for the most part, I feel like a lot of people have watched the anime or read the manga or vice versa, have played the later generations of the remakes like Fire Red and Leaf Green or Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which delve deeper into this story and have kind of leached that into what they believe this game to have given them. Genuinely, go back and replay these games. You're given little to no exposition or reason for your existence there the entire game. There's nothing for you as the player to latch onto and properly read and get enthralled into because there's no active story being partaken in. You go and you beat Giovanni, sure, but that doesn't mean that's an interior part of the story. You just, again, are in an unfortunate circumstance where you coincidentally can't progress until you deal with these guys. You don't actually have any beef with them, and you're not even ever actually bothered by them. If anything, you're a 10-year-old kid going out of your way to fight a crime syndicate who is honestly leaving you alone for the most part, except to try to steal your Pokemon once or twice and Mountain Moon, for Christ's sake. It really just doesn't come together at all or make any sense. Honestly, Giovanni giving up at the end is just nonsensical at best. Why don't they just jump you? And I know it's a game, and that's a little ridiculous of a statement for me to be pushing them jumping a 10-year-old kid, but you more or less hopefully get the point of what I'm saying. Genuinely go back and replay these games. No matter which one you pick, red, blue, green, or yellow, there's no predominant story. Heck, you just sort of arrive on the SSN, and you collect all the gym badges, you battle a couple of grunts in the cave, and then all of a sudden you're battling some big boss for an elevator key, and the only reason why you're pushing to do that is because they're blocking the 6th gym, so there's nothing you can do except fight them. The whole Snorlax ordeal is also ridiculous, forcing you to go to some random tower haunted by ghosts and get a Pokédoll or a soda to get the guards. It just feels like there are constant roadblocks in your way, but no actual reasoning behind them existing besides just to force you to do randomly generated tasks. So, I think I've rambled about this quite enough, but I give the story aspect of this game a 2 out of 10. And genuinely speaking, Gary Oak is that 2 out of 10. He's the only active story or pressure you as the player have to do anything in the entire game. Him. That's it. Not the Pokédex, not Professor Oak, not your desire to be a champion. Gary Oak being a douche is the only reason you have to want to actually play this game. You don't even really know what's going on in the game as you're playing it because the tutorial was so bad. Now, of course, you're not an idiot. At least most of you probably aren't. So you can grasp it and figure it out as you go. But that's not a good gameplay design if the game doesn't give you anything to go with. You're just sort of LARPing and putting your own ideas of what's happening for the game. You're doing the work, which some could argue might mean you are being immersed, but I'd argue the exact opposite in saying you are being delusioned into thinking there's actually a game here. The only gameplay that this thing has is walking from route to route and catching and battling. That's it. There is no active story besides Gary. And with that whole deal, I want to once again ask the Gen 1ers to please not beat me outside in the parking lot. I am just doing my best to convey what I saw when I played these games, and honestly, the last time I had played Red, Blue, Green, or Yellow since before this was about like 7 years ago. It was fresh off my mind. I genuinely was kind of excited to replay through these games, but after the second game that I had gotten through, I couldn't take it anymore, and I had to transition to gold, and then I came back and finished the last 2 games. It was just boring and somewhat mind-numbing. So, again, with that, 2 out of 10, and I will be moving on to the next category, which will be the graphics. Now, the graphics of this game is obviously kind of hard to argue against. Obviously, it's an old retro Game Boy, and the hardware they had was very limiting. So, with that, I think for this being the very first Pokemon game, and, well, the introduction of what we truly got when we were playing Pokemon, that this game deserves good merit. Have you seen what a Game Boy can do? Tetris barely functions, and they were able to make this game on it. I can only imagine the geniuses we had back in the day who were able to strap this thing on here. Oh, God forbid the graphics don't hold up, which they don't. If you wish to argue against that, fair enough. I think there's an argument for retro still being considered a quality graphic style. However, I am against that. I think retro is extremely outdated by now, and I much prefer the 3D world we live in where everything is modeled and there's ease of access to those things. I'm just kidding. So, as much as I'd like to go, oh, Gen 1, bad graphic, new game, whatever, you know what? I think we can give this game a humble 8 out of 10 on the graphics scaling, which seems incredibly high, but again, I'm treating this as if it is the first game I am ever playing in the Pokemon series from the very beginning, and with that, this is an amazement that they were able to even put this on the Game Boy. I don't even think the average person now could figure out how to do this. Of course, probably they could, but I'm over-exaggerating to try to push the point that this is actually insane that they were able to do this. So, the graphics and all things considered were pretty solid for the time they came out in. So, with that, I'm going to not waste any more time on the graphics, and I'm going to push for the next category. And that takes us up to the next category, the grind. Great heavens, the grind. Need I remind you, I was playing through these games with no speed-ups, no Uncle Jim Tendo hacks. I was playing through these games on a flat ground, just running as far as I could, with nothing helping me to get to the very end, at least on my first playthrough. In some of the later generations, I do rare candy a little bit, but I'll explain why when I get to those. So, for this game specifically, the grind is terrible. We take the experience share for granted. The second your Pokemon out-level the opponent's Pokemon, your XP ratio plummets. There are very few trainers anywhere, and odds are you the player, most likely just have a ridiculously over-leveled starter, and then nothing else going for you or your entire team. Nothing going for you. And if you want to spend 20 hours walking back and forth in a patch of grass in Route 1 because you picked Charmander and have to level them up to basically 16 to beat a bunch of rocks, be my guest. This game's grind is actually abysmal. I wouldn't wish this game's grind on my worst enemy. Half the random wild Pokemon can paralyze, confuse, poison, and do all sorts of amalgamations to you, and every single trainer has come packed with the most annoying teams to basically force you to just switch train anything you want to get to a reasonable level. Red, I remind you that the Pokemon games don't actually expect you, the player, to have 6 Pokemon by the time you reach, say, the first or second gym. They expect you to passively add 1 or your second or third member, by the 5th or 4th gym, and then you get your 4th member and your 5th member and your 6th member by the Victory Road, which, no one has ever done that in the history of Pokemon, and if you have, consider yourself one in a million, because I don't often believe that that's a thing people really do. Most people just go Route 1, catch the first 5 things they see, and those are their favorite Pokemon for the rest of their lives. But I digress. The grind in this game gets a 0 out of 10. There is no redeemable qualities to this grind. I get it was on old hardware. I don't care. I'm never probably going to play these games again unless I'm using cheats or speed up or something, simply because of how absurd the grind for this game was. So, as to push myself away from the PTSD riddled situation I have brought up upon myself, I'm going to be moving on to the next category, which will be... Now, I'm not one for reading scripts. Typically, I like to paraphrase on a few things. However, the next category is the battles category, which is one of, if not my biggest and most passionate complaints about the early generations of Pokemon. So, I want to make sure I get this absolutely right. And of course, I could do a bunch of jump cuts and make this thing probably look a touch bit more polished than me reading off a piece of paper, as I have been just sort of para-reading it and then just going off the gist. But I want to get this exactly right to the feelings that I have. The core part of every Pokemon game, the battles. Every single Pokemon trainer striving to be the best has to beat the best. And great heavens, just like with grinding, was this terrible. This is probably my most passionate complaint about this game, and I'll die on this hill. Pokemon Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow have these core gameplay issues with battling where literally nothing works correctly. If you ever hear a Gen 1er say these special words, oh man, I wish Pokemon was hard like in the good old days, what they actually meant to say was, man, I wish Pokemon was a buggy mess that didn't work correctly, and actively screwed me over with bug after bug to make the battles more confusing and less fair for the players. With the 1 in 256 glitch, burn not working correctly, and half the types in the game not programmed correctly, psychic types are busted because their counter doesn't work, half the moves in the game just lie to you and don't do what they say, critical hits are based on speed stat, making Persian the best Pokemon by far, and Snorlax a demigod sent to this earth as an equalizer. Normal types make this game an actual joke to play. Could you imagine in the new game, in the new age Pokemon, if they kept this system? Regieleki would be winning grand finals every year. Meowscarada, who? My Sandrush Excadrill always crits. Lamau. Also, enemy trainers and wild Pokemon have infinite PP, and their Pokemon don't follow the same rules as yours do. Brock literally cheated during our battle. I used Ember with my Charmander, and I got a lucky burn. He just used Bide the turn before, so you'd think, oh cool, I get my 1 turn of toxic damage. Yeah, because that's how burn works, by the way. But nah, he used a full heal his next turn, which he shouldn't even have had, and then the 3rd turn hit, and Bide still went off. He used an item in section for his Bide turn that he shouldn't have had to cure something, which I didn't even know was a gameplay bug that could happen when I started recording this. But yeah, then the 3rd hit of Bide still went off. Like, that's literally garbage. Give me my badge, you cheater. I haven't even gotten to how rap works just yet. Okay, let me calm down. I like how I wrote that in this. All of this wrapped up into one neat little bow. This game's battles are the worst in any of these games. I came back in this script just to make sure I wasn't crazy, and nope, Past Speedy was 100% right. I could get a better turn-based battle combat system from the back of a cereal box. If anyone ever says this game was the best in its series, and was, actually difficult, you send them to me and we can have a little chat about how they're wrong. 0 out of 10. It can't get worse. And honestly, the battling topic for this is one of the biggest reasons why this video even is a thing. Because I'm tired of people saying that the older generations of Pokemon were so tough. That's why I'm putting my opinion in there. So, now that I'm done reading this, I'm going to slingshot to the next category where I'm not just reading off a piece of paper. The next category being music, which, as Pokemon is known for, its music being one of arguably the best things about every single Pokemon game to ever exist. This game holds up pretty true. I'd like to argue that some of the songs just don't hit like they should, but it's quite genuinely impressive that they were able to muster this much music on the hardware. They were making the hardware individually make these sounds. There weren't no downloads or MP3s crammed into this game. They told the hardware to beep and boop and were able to make melodies that had never hit the gaming world before. It's actually quite interesting and something that I quite adore about the old retro games, which is a rare thing for me. However, I will be giving this game a humble 6 out of 10 on the ranking scale for its music. I do not think every single song is a banger, and a lot of general bias probably comes from, the earlier routes and such, giving you that childhood vibe. But by the time you get to, say, Lavender Town, the vibes go away very quickly. A few songs in this game just don't hit like I even remember them hitting, and I'm trying to be modest here. 6 out of 10 is a lot more than it deserves. For it being the first game, it obviously gets that bump up. If this game's music came out in anywhere else in the generations, it would be much lower by comparison. So, I'm just going to go ahead and slingshot into the next category and stop wasting your time. The gyms. Now, the gyms is a category that I typically added for the later generations of Pokemon. However, I felt it fair to come back and at least give a piece on this generation of Pokemon. Albeit not much, at least some of the gyms, for the most part, kind of give you the vibes of what they're trying to go for. You walk into Misty Gym, it's a pool, it's water types. There's a couple of oddballs like Surge out there who decides to make you sift through trash cans, which is at least an interesting puzzle, I can say, albeit it probably caused a lot of people PTSD moving towards in the future, because there's a lot of people that hate this one. But I don't think it's very fair to be too harmful towards or hateful towards the beginning generation's Pokemon gyms, so I'll give them a humble 4 out of 10 and move on with this category. There's no reason to really hang on it because there's not really much here. So, going into the final category, my overall critique. Now, I know I've been pretty harsh on this game, given that it is the first game in the series, but I feel it very fair to be as critical as I possibly can, because this is the building block. If I just threw 10s willy-nilly around at every possible thing that this game ever did, then, it would be very ridiculous to grade anything else in the future below or around the same stakes. It's just, you gotta have a proper groundwork to base your grading off of. Albeit, I'm not supposed to be trying to use the future generation, so I was generous in some categories. Probably a lot more than I should have been. So, with all of the gameplay breaking bugs and the lack of story and a few lack of developmenting things that this game just didn't even really try to match, I think that in the end of the day, it is what it is. The first Pokemon game, and sometimes you just gotta take a game how it is. So, I don't really feel the need to drag this on anymore, so I will be listing the final rankings and then segueing into Generation 2. Neat. Generation 2 Pokemon. To kick things off, I'll be showcasing a list of all of the things that Generation 2 Pokemon changed from Generation 1 Pokemon to make it a more appealing game for the average gamer that, happened to play this game. Oh. Nothing. A game made in basically a workshop in the middle of nowhere by about 20 dudes somehow managed to cultivate the sequel to Pokemon, because apparently Nintendo and Game Freak hadn't realized the absolute cash cow they had yet. So, with that small little introduction to what we're about to get ourselves into, expect quite a lot of passive criticism, because I feel it unfair to just sit there and blatantly beat on a game that was barely given a chance to begin with. What they did with that is very impressive either way. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the beginning category, the starters. Now, Totodile, Chikorita, Cyndaquil, absolutely solid across the board. Chikorita is a little bit on the lackluster side, but I think Meganium gets a little bit too much hate. Feraligatr has that weird middle stage called Crokinole, which is an absolute hate crime that I hope to never have to see again. I know it's going to happen later, so I'll call it out each time it happens. And then, of course, you have, Cyndaquil, Quilava, Typhlosion, weirdly enough, it's not a dragon, as most people tend to argue, so most people prefer Typhlosion over Charizard, and that's a whole debate I'm not even going to get into, because I'm a water-type enjoyer. We stay up until, Gen 6, and then there's that weird middle stage, but that's completely irrelevant to the point. What I need to discuss, though, that is a part of the point, is the fact that the moves these Pokemon learn are non-existent. Meganium gets Solar Beam at, level 60. You know what grass moves they get outside of that? Growth, okay? That is a hate crime. Paraguay needs you to go to prison now. It is absolutely ridiculous that under any circumstances someone would look at Feraligator's moveset or Typhlosion's moveset and go, yes, this is well designed. And you may be thinking, oh, well, just get a TM. You can't. Due to the fact that there is no physical special split, if you pick Feraligatr, you're effectively useless until the post-game, because all of the water moves he would get from TMs, if he got any at all, wouldn't matter. Typhlosion at least gets some cool things in TMs, which makes it mildly usable, and Meganium gets shafted again! No wonder this Pokemon's arguably one of the most forgotten Pokemon in Pokemon history. Any poor kid that picked this probably never picked it again in any substantial playthroughs, because it was such a letdown, they probably tossed it for the nearest grass-type Pokemon. It's actually ridiculous that anybody in the human race would deem this an acceptable system. It's a complete loss of words on my end. It's ridiculous. So, as much as I love their designs, and I think they're actually quite solid for what they bring, the weird middle stages plus the poor leveling system, these starters get a staggering 6 out of 10. They're still solid, they're still your childhood, but compared to Generation 1 starters, at least the Gen 1 starters had the moves going for them. Again, physical special split will fix a little bit of this, but even if you gave them physical special split, their movesets would still be terrible. Again, Solar Beam, the only grass move at level 60. That's ridiculous. And you want to know what else is ridiculous? The next category, which I'm going to segue into like this. The tutorial. Now, this game actually does quite a good job for how early it was at, explaining all the gameplay mechanics and letting you know each and every small individual thing that you intend to be doing throughout the game. You get the quick battle system. Elm tells you everything you need to know about the Pokédex and how all that gets handled. When you pick up the parcel from Oak, he explains a few of the item mechanics. There is, of course, the old man who teaches you what all the buildings do. You have your initial battle with Silver, or whatever you named him, that teaches you the battling mechanics, and then the rest of the systems are on random sideboards throughout the route. Rather than putting you through a 4-hour journey into Neverland, the game, for the most part, does a really good job at just sustaining itself as it goes and giving you a proper area to learn the game. Unlike Pokemon Generation 1 that just sort of throws you in there like a bag of cats in a river, this game actually goes through its loops and teaches you every single thing you'd need to know to be a solid Pokemon trainer. And as much as I'd like to give it an astounding rating, I do think that making trainers have to randomly click signs could lead to the average 8-year-old just simply not doing that, or going off and clicking some other, just ignoring it entirely and possibly missing it. So I'm going to give this one a grading of a solid 7 out of 10, which is still pretty good considering how early this game was. Future tutorials are, hoping to be like this, just slightly better. So for the most part, I hope the rest of the future games do keep that up. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump to the next category. The Rival. Or in this case, just some random dude who's coincidentally in your way. The rival of this game, Silver, often depicted in the mangas in such a glorious way, and this game kind of cuts the barrel short. He just arrives, blows up the Elm's lab, or breaks in and steals a Pokemon, forces you to battle, drops his ID somehow, and outside of that, you get no exposition or character development of him. A lot of people look at his Golbat evolving or this and that to try to push it further and say the future generations of Heart Gold and Soul Silver and such, but unless you're willing to do the random Celebi event in that game, you don't really get any actual lore of this guy. He just kind of exists, and he's not trying to push you to be better. He just shows up, gives you the finger, and tells you to get the side duck out of his way. And I don't think that's a rival at all. If anything, it's honestly just a nuisance. I think it's very, 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 very poorly executed. I think that Silver is arguably one of the worst rivals in the game. I think that the red fight on Mount Silver is a better rival fight because that's someone you're looking up to and trying to compete against and beat. You're not looking to compete against and beat Silver. You're just looking to get him out of your way so you can continue advancing the story. So, outside of the general gameplay loop, like, it's really terrible. A crisp 0 out of 10, if you ask me. Probably one of, if not, the worst rivals in the entire series. Argue with a wall. I don't think there's anything else to say with that. Genuinely. Go back. Play the games. He barely exists in the plotline. He is completely irrelevant. For his ranking, I'll be giving him a solid 2 out of 10. Which is, about as good as it's probably going to get for him and about probably one of the lowest rankings we will see. There's probably, one other rival in the series I could think of that is poorly executed as this guy, and ultimately it just resorts for a bad rival, and honestly one that if you removed him from the game, nothing would change throughout your playthrough because the story still forces you to do things. So, with that, I'll be segueing into the next category. The story. Okay, this one's a little bit of a curveball. Right out the gate, you get the Elm stuff, all the tutorials, the whole Ulk ordeal, you get the Silver exposition, and then, poof, nothing. You are now released into the realms of the story. You go and get your first gym, boom, bam, bam. You go and get your second gym, bam, bam, boom. All of a sudden, you're dancing with kimono girls, and by that I mean dancing and battling their evolutions, and then all of a sudden after that, you're seeing a Suicune in a tower, and it bounces around like a crack addict, and then back to the gyms we go, cycling. All of a sudden, you get the bells. You can go battle Ho if you like, or you can go deal with Lugia if you hate yourself enough. And then, you get the Suicune fight, catch it or don't, slip on through, battle a couple more gyms, and then, oh no, Team Rocket's back because we couldn't think of a villain because sadly only 20 guys worked on this game, so this is the best that they could do, just reusing old assets. So now you're kind of battling Team Rocket in the same instance, and then you beat the guy in the cell phone tower, kind of, and then Giovanni decides to not come back because that makes sense, because why would he come back? And then, boom, we're in Kanto. Just like that. And now you gotta go through 8 random gyms that have the worst level cap design I've ever seen in my life that you should blitzkrieg through with your overlevel starter. And then zip, zoom, bam, bibbity bop, you're on Mount Silver battling Red. That's the story. Literally it. 4 out of 10. There's barely an attempt. God bless the troops that were dealing with, only 20 developers making this game. I wish they would have locked in. It could have been interesting. I think that it's kind of cool that both the maps were included of Johto and Kanto. But yeah, it really, you just kind of snap your fingers and all of a sudden you're battling Red. So yeah, 4 out of 10 is where I'm going to leave it. So let's go ahead and segue into the next segment. The graphics, similar to Generation 1, it's like holding up a mirror. Arguably speaking, it's a little ridiculous to compare them to the ages, but they just have not aged well. They look about exactly how you'd think. Again, I feel like a lot of people look back on Fire Red and Leaf Green and Heart Gold and Soul Silver when they think of these games, but I was playing the original games. This is Generation 2, mind you, and all things considered, the graphics are very, very poor. It's exactly like Generation 1. I'd say arguably worse because some of the additive colors just don't help anything at all. They actually make it worse. At least when Generation 1 was more so limited on coloration, they got a little bit of a pass. But I'd argue this is a 2 out of 10, and that's about where I'm going to leave the ranking for the mass majority of this. I feel like in certain aspects, you could argue higher than Gen 1 because of the coloring, but this is another one where I'm going to have to tell you to either trust me or go back and play the games yourself, because sometimes you enter Burnt Tower and it looks like the only thing that should be burning are my eyes because it's just so terrible. So I'm just going to go ahead and hop over to the next category, the grind. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, the grind. In most Pokemon games, it's often referred to as the worst part. Surprisingly enough, in this game, I didn't really have to grind, which is a thumbs up. Every single trainer that was in my way, I fought at convenience, and then I battled like whatever grass Pokemon I randomly walked into, but I never really had to kind of sit in one spot and shuffle back and forth in a patch of grass. My Pokemon were able to just consistently be cycled out. And I don't know it's whether or not I did a better job than what I did before, or vice versa what happened, but surprisingly the grind in this game was solid. I didn't actually have to grind. The only time I had to grind the entire game was to do the red fight in the post game. But arguably, I don't think that's allowed to be held against it because it is the post game. It's expected that you're supposed to do a little bit more. To get through the entirety of the main game, though, I didn't need to really do anything grind-wise. I feel like if there's any grind at all, it was just like right at the beginning when I was getting like the level 2 Pokemon up to level 5, and that was it. So surprisingly, I will be giving this game a 9 out of 10 on the grind. The only thing I could argue would be slightly better is the red thing, but again, I'm barely holding that against it. 9 out of 10. It was an enjoyable experience. Never once did I feel I lost the battle because my Pokemon were just severely underleveled, or never once did I feel like I blitzed the battle because my Pokemon were severely overleveled. So yeah, really solid. On to the next section. The battles. Now, I know I haven't been too chatty with this game. Sadly, it's kind of hard to find a lot of things to talk about when it comes to Generation 2 Pokemon, because, as I said before, it's like holding up a mirror to Generation 1 Pokemon, and where that shines through the most is somewhat the battles. This is what happens when you confuse absurdity with difficulty. They're not the same thing. Difficulty is, a boss doing a good bit of damage and having a high health bar, but a reasonable moveset so that you can counter it, right? Like, say, in Dark Souls 2, for example. Vice versa, Elden Ring is what you get when you combine absurdity, where you just have so much going on that it is unreasonable to expect the average person on, say, their first, second, or even third time to be able to get through it without knowing information that they wouldn't have otherwise. That is when things start getting to an absurd ratio. This game is the epiphany of that. Generation 2 Pokemon games are not hard. They're absurd. Every single enemy, Pokemon, trainer, whatever, has a Golbat or a coughing or something that's going to poison you, confuse you, burn you, all sorts of lives. And in this game, the types were actually properly fixed and such, and things were kind of working correctly. So it actually just made the experience so much worse. And I assume the average person with their overleveled Pokemon might just be one-shotting every Zubat out of the sky, but I wasn't. I was trying to maintain a flat level cap, just as if I was casually playing through the game, not like Nuzlocke standards or anything like that. I did overlevel once or twice, but for the grand scheme of things, the battling is absolutely abysmal. Every wild Pokemon or trainer just wanted to put me in a wheelchair. It was a genuinely, horrifically terrifying and suffering situation to go through each independent cave. Which again, there was plenty of battles which made the grind easy, but mind you, the grind and battles don't need to be similar in my enjoyment level. I liked that I didn't have to really grind because I was able to just do all the battles and get enough XP from it. That doesn't mean the battles weren't terrible still. But, I just did not have to grind as much because I could just do all of the trainer battles. I genuinely think that if they would have, better optimized the opponent trainer's Pokemon to not just be the same 5 different Pokemon on every single team, it would have been a much better experience, running into a Golbat every 20 fights rather than, or every 2. But instead, obviously, only 20 people worked on this game, but that's not going to get them leeway on this one. I'm giving the battle section a 2 out of 10, and that's really all there is to it. Let's go ahead and jump over to the next section. Yet another hyped up retro game. We're switching to the music category. Just like with Generation 1, you can kind of pick your fancy on this. Obviously, music is one of the most extremely opinionated categories. It just depends on what you like listening to. Some people might not even like listening to my voice, for example. Sounds are a fickle thing. And this is another thing. The biggest issue with Generation 2 Pokemon is it's incredibly hard to separate it from the Generation 1 games. It feels like they just control Seed and control Beat It, and with that aspect, the music. However, with the new Johto games, outside of the intro and a few blips, the music doesn't actually keep up to that Pokemon standard we know and love in the future generations, and it might actually make its score lower than, if so, equal to, Generation 1 Pokemon. I'm going to leave this score up to a crisp 5 out of 10, which honestly just hurts me to say because I love Pokemon music, But again, this feels like another one where, like, yeah, Heart Gold Soul Silver music is great because it's like, upgraded and it's proper and such. But these old retro songs really just grind at the ears sometimes, and not every single one hits the same way. Some hit like my ex-wife, and others hit like my daughter. It's just a completely different experience that you're walking yourself into. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump over to the next category. And then I feel like a broken record sliding over into gyms here. They did the best with what they had, but realistically, again, similar to Generation 1, when I walk into a gym, I can, for the most part, get the type correctly, and I'm not going to be too harsh on 20 dudes who made an entire Johto map with how much they critiqued and specified certain things. I'm really just walking into this blind and like, hey, similar to red and blue and green and yellow, so I'm going to give it a similar ranking, 6 out of 10. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over to a more interesting category, the next one. Pokemon selection. Now, the keen of you might have noticed that this category was not included in the Generation 1 Pokemon rant. However, from this generation moving forward, I will be discussing all of the new iterations of Pokemon that the new games add to the decks. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense to talk about the Pokemon selection in the original game because all 150 plus 1 Pokemon are relatively available, so it's a little ridiculous to have any complaints about the Pokemon selection. That's it. That's the whole decks. However, Generation 2 likes to do this great thing where half the Pokemon that were added in the new game are locked behind the post-game. Ah, yes, I love finding a level 42 Misdreavus on Mount Silver before I fight Red, the final battle in the game. I understand that Pokemon believes that you, the player, are only going to capture a select amount of Pokemon as you're playing through the game, which to a certain extent makes sense, but by like the 7th gym, you're gonna have a party of 6. There's no way you're arriving in the after-post game in the middle of Kanto to catch Houndour. Yo, shout out my Houndoom fans. You're real doomers when it comes to this game because they just simply blocked them behind. There's a whole list of them. I might toss it up behind me. There's like 10, 15 Generation 2 exclusive Pokemon that simply don't exist until the post game. Why would they even fathom doing something as dumb as that? Give us the new Pokemon that you have recently added to the game. There is a very, very, very fair chance that some kid played through this game, didn't find the post-game Pokemon, etc., and thinks they're Gen 3 Pokemon because they're more included in that game than this game. And again, I'm not using Gen 3 to glorify my rankings, but, you get the point for the most part, I'd hope. So, although I do like a lot of the iterations, the way the Pokemon selection is handled is completely ridiculous and absolutely absurd. So this is yet another category this game gets a 2 out of 10 on, which is just about as much as I'm willing to give it. Just give me the Pokemon game. If any other future games do this, I will be just as harsh as I was with this one. It's absolutely ridiculous. Just go ahead on to the next. Overall feelings of the game. Final category. Now, I know I've been, for the most part, just calling this game a Generation 1 clone, and if I'm being honest, it is. I've also been mentioning the fact that this game was made by 20 guys, and without it, we would just simply not have Pokemon as we know it. It took 20 guys in a shed to make this game and make Pokemon what it is. No, luckily, it paid off because we have all the generations we have now, and the next generation, I know for a fact, actually does pick up the quality, so I'm really excited to get to the 3rd generation of Pokemon because I have much more interesting things to say about it. So, with that, I would like to bid adieu to Generation 2. I just thought of that off the top of my head. I'm very proud of that. I'm going to make sure that's known. But I could never see recommending this game to somebody, same as Generation 1. It's like, oh, Generation 1, just play Fire and Leaf Green. And Generation 2, sad to say, Heart Gold and Soul Silver has it beat. There's not really much reason to play these original games. I'd argue, unless you're doing exactly what I'm doing and just like having a replay for the sake of the old vibes. So I'm just going to leave it at that and toss the overall score up behind me. And let's go ahead and start pushing towards Generation 3. Dear God, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. We're finally here, baby! Generation 3! The generation of Pokemon that finally took itself seriously and realized it was a massive cash cow. So we're gonna go ahead and kick it off with the starters. We have banger after banger after banger after banger. I'm talking Mudkip. I'm talking Trico. I'm talking Torchic. No weird middle stage evolutions to ruin it up. A peak final Evo to clean it all up. I've got a Kentucky-sized bruiser, I got a water sleuzer, and I got a sneaky ninja green guy. There ain't nothing better than this lineup. Let me tell you, it is absolute peak. The moves they learn, the types they are, and the Pokemon that they are, the entire line is absolutely perfect. Mind you, this was not my childhood game. I replayed through this and I have been shown the light. Could you argue that there's maybe a better water starter? Sure, I could argue Oshawott, right? Like for alligators design. Could you argue that, say, there's a better fire type, like Infernape sweeps Blaziken? I could debate that pretty handedly too. Could you argue that, say, Rowlet's just a little cooler than Trico? Maybe, but you're forgetting one thing here. Starters are based off the whole 3, baby, and Gen 3 takes it home. Banger after banger after banger. Best starters on the list. 10 out of 10. It don't get any better than this, baby. Absolute peak. Cash it, take it right to the bank. Let's go ahead and slingshot to the next category. Wasting any more time discussing this is pointless. The tutorial. They finally decided that, randomly having some drunk old guy teach you how to battle was a very poor way of teaching the average kid how to play the Pokemon games. So, finally, we are actually getting tutorials in Pokemon games. However, this slowly starts the curve of 4-hour-long tutorials that kind of start to become an overbearing system, where it's like too much is just as bad as too little. We're looking for that just right type of mixture here. However, this is the beginning of it, and they do a pretty darn good job. Every single aspect of this game's tutorial teaches you the basics you need to know, all of the new abilities and such, which you can finally familiarize yourself with, and the game does it in a pretty enjoyable way. I never once feel like I'm being blitzed through it in half a second and expected to figure things out, but I also don't feel like I'm sitting there for 20 years. You could easily get through this tutorial in, say, 40 minutes to an hour, which I'd argue is about where a tutorial for a game that's becoming as complicated as this should be, and I'm gonna slap this game's tutorial with a firm 8 out of 10, genuinely speaking. I think that this is amongst the best tutorials in the game, and it shows that the Pokemon developers have realized that this game is something special, and so they are deciding to do something with it in making this tutorial as good as it was and making the game as good as it is. Which, speaking of, I'm going to jump into the next category because I am very excited to talk about this game. Let's go ahead and blitz on over to that one. The rivals. Now, I'd like to make a quick note here that Wally is often not considered a rival by the Pokemon community. He's more so considered a friend, or that random kid that caught that Ralts that you're jealous of. I, for one, am considering him a rival because he is someone you consistently fight, and with that, May and Brendan under the same category. He is, on his own separate journey, and he's not pushing you to do anything super crazy, but he is a major player in the story that is currently unfolding, so by my own logic, I think that he does classify as a rival. Now, not to bore you with a lot of random nonsensical garbage involving that specifically, I'm going to go ahead and segue into why this generation's rivals are quite weak. Brendan and May are not involved in the story. They're a childhood friend archetype, but you haven't been their friend your entire childhood. You randomly moved there on a Tuesday afternoon, and I guess they're just the friendliest people. Brendan and or May, whoever your gender is by the time you pick the game, one or the other, it's irrelevant. They're both the same person. Kind of just show up randomly once in a blue moon and challenge you to a battle to which you accept, and then they go away. They're not really an intricate part in the story, like especially in Emerald, where they might as well not exist. Heck, they give the bad guys more character depth and inspiration than anything. And moving on towards Wally, Wally's actually the carry of this, which is why I consider him more of a rival. At least he has a story where, his parents talk about how he was sick and ill, and how these Pokemon and the battling and the new journeys are making him feel better and better and better as he goes. And at some point, the pity starts to kick in a little. You can kind of feel bad for the guy and sympathize to some level of degree, unless you're a heartless person. So I think that at least his story, albeit a bit on the softer side and not the bloodthirsty rivals we're used to, he definitely carries this category more than Brendan and May, who just kind of jump you on a Ruby Tuesday and, make sure you can heal up your Pokemon before battling you. And they're not really after the same things as you, so they're not really a considerable rival. They're just that neighbor that lives across the street. So, of course, that makes them your rival, which I think is ridiculous. Wally does a lot more than anybody else. If anything, I'd argue your dad, Norman, is more of a rival than anything. Also, shout out this game for being the only game with a dad in it. But yeah, I'm going to leave the rival category at a 5 out of 10 and go ahead and snip it over to the next one. The story. Now, Game Freak finally decided to lock in for this game. Unlike all the other games that fail on this, that, who's it, what's it, this game actually has an integrated story that you are consistently reading and intricated into and all of that stuff. I used the wrong word, but you get the gist of it. You are a part of this story. You play a purpose. Your role actually matters. You do become friends with Steven Stone. You do deliver the message. You're a parcel boy. You run into the Aqua Grunts at first, but then you become an intricate part in stopping it. You have a reason for being there. Honestly, so do all the other gym leaders and such, but I guess you have to do all the work around here, which is a bit of a subsidiary that gets fixed in later generations, but there is an active reasoning for you being here. The only big disgrace to this game is the fact that Rayquaza and Emerald is locked behind the post game, but in the main overarching story of Ruby or Sapphire, you're going against the big bad blue guys or the big bad red guys, and, well, you hate one or the other because one likes land and one likes water, and they are trying to summon the primordial beings of Kyogre and Groudon and such, and weirdly enough, Maxie and Archie are some of the better written bad guys in the entirety of Pokemon. I wouldn't even consider them villains. I would just consider them bad guys. They, by the end of the game, realize their wrongdoings and slowly shift to being more passive. They probably get a bit of jail time, get off on good behavior, and are back out in society already. It's even showcased in Emerald where both of them realize that they're kind of in the wrong and that it's ridiculous to completely absolve the land of water or of ground. It makes a lot of sense. And then again, you as the player play that pivotal role of shutting down the organization because it is your primary goal in the game throughout the entire game. You're not just mindlessly going and collecting gym badges and then bloop, random story. You are actively pursuing the story and collecting the gym badges as the secondary thing you are doing. The story is the A-plot. The story is what you are supposed to be doing, which makes this story excellently crafted. 8 out of 10. The only reason why it gets some drops is because the fact that on Emerald specifically, the Legendary is locked behind the post-game in one of the most infuriating tower puzzles I've ever played in my entire life. And if you've never caught Rayquaza in Emerald, I urge you to try. That bike puzzle makes me hate myself. So, 8 out of 10, argue with the wall. It should deserve a 9 out of 10. But I mentioned I was petty at the start, and I am. This is the worst puzzle ever created in Pokemon. Just give me my Legendary, Game Freak. So now I'm going to be jumping to the next category before I complain about this puzzle for 30 minutes of the video. Time for the graphics. Now, I'm going to say this for the second time when it comes to Emerald. Finally! Game Freak locked in! Listen, I'm a sucker for the classic retro old style stuff too, right? It's not my favorite, but I can enjoy it and appreciate it. However, I am so glad we are in the pixel art era, baby. No Game Boy, nothing, alright? We're completely locked in now with Pokemon Emerald and all of the Generation 3 games. Now, I know they're still technically on the Game Boy, but please, you get the point. They have finally updated the graphics to a set degree where they are actually appeasing to the eye. Grass is the color of grass, the dirt is the color of dirt. The entire screen doesn't just need to be red because the graphics quality is of a toaster. You can actually see the detail in everything. Now, there are a couple of ugly sprites like Vulpix, which is terrifying, but across the massive board of inspiration here, there are a constant push for the graphics quality going through the moon. Now, obviously, this is the first dip into the pixel art style, and obviously I'm not comparing it to future games because it hasn't come out yet, but There are a few things that with the, more realistic and updated coloring and such shine through, which drop it quite a few points in my eyes. Graphics is a bit finicky. If I reach a certain area and all of a sudden I'm just completely unimmersed, that might be an entire point gone on its own, which again, the visuals are very opinionated, so, please feel free to disagree with me. But I think this game gets a humble 6 out of 10 when it comes to the graphics quality, and I feel most people will agree with me if they've especially played the original Ruby and Sapphire. Emerald does fix a couple of things, which is weird, because this is the only game where the third one in the series actually properly does this. But yeah, all things considered, those small fixes don't really make the game look more appealing than how good it already is. So yeah, 6 out of 10 is where I'm going to leave that. On to the next one. The battles. Y'all remember like 10 minutes ago in this video when I was complaining about how Generation 1 and 2 are just constantly trying to put you in a wheelchair and paralyze you and poison you and burn you? Yeah, well, this game has done the complete opposite. The teams that are built for each big bad guy and all of the random grunts actually have a couple of brain cells rubbed between the ideas that were put into them. Some of the trainers, of course, still have their ridiculous Zubats or a random Voltorb whose only move is self-destruct, but for the most part, I am consistently, engaged in different types of battles. It's no longer Grunt A, Zubat, Grunt B, coughing, Grunt C, Zubat, Grunt D, coughing. It's now a more flourished design of teams, which of course could be a compensation to the fact that there are a lot more Pokemon to work with. However, I say that's garbage. There is a higher standard to the battles we're playing against, and this game does a really good job at it. Mind you, this category also includes, like, say, the Gym Leader battles and the Elite Four battles and the Champion battles, unto which the champion of this game, both the original Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, they have two different champions, trust, are also really well built. Every single battle in this game feels very comfortable to do, and I give the battles of this game an 8 out of 10. I truly think that the only reason why it loses a good chunk of change is the fact that this is also the beginning of the generations of Pokemon where the enemy trainers just don't have 6 Pokemon for some reason, like ever, until you reach the champion and then only they have 6 Pokemon, which is in turn because Pokemon believes that as you play the game, you're not just going to catch 5 Pokemon on Route 1 and have a party of 6 right off the bat. They suspect that by the time you reach Victory Road, you'll be adding the 6th Pokemon to your team, so they try to compensate by having enemy trainers not really have a set amount of Pokemon that goes above, say, the number 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 until you reach a pivotal point in the game, which creates a downflow of difficulty, which will continue throughout the next 2 or so generations. Black and White picks it up a little bit, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So yeah, 8 out of 10 is very humble, and I think that it's solid for where the game is at currently. Plus, the new gameplay mechanics and such are really, really, really nice. So, moving on to the next category. Actually, scratch that. I've realized that this is also the game that adds in the secondary ability battle mechanics. I'm going to drop it down to a 7 out of 10 on that because they are very poorly executed, at least in this game. They get cleaned up in Generation 4 with the special physical split, but in this game, half of the Pokemon are basically make or break over their ability, which is just very poor battle mechanic game design, so I will be leaving it at that. And now, moving on to the next category. Alexa, play Hoenn Departure. Now, this is where we start remembering the music of Pokemon. This is where peak starts being the norm when it comes to the music category of Pokemon. Every single song in this game hits basically on the head. The champion battle is rent-free in most people's. Every single gym fight and trainer fight, all of the rival soundtracks, each new route, the bike theme. God, the bike theme of this game is way too good for it being a bike theme. Probably more of a reason to ride the bike than any other thing in this game. This game gets a crisp 9 out of 10, and I'd like to put a quick footnote here that almost every single Pokemon game after this is going to be getting a 9 or higher rating, and it is 100% my personal bias for my own music taste. If yours is different, that's fair. Music is one of the most opinionated topics in the game. I'll be leaving it at that and moving on to the next category. The gyms. Outside of Brawly's gym, which had me trapped in walls for a little bit longer than I'd like to admit, the gyms in this game are kind of hit or miss, like every move in this game that has below 100% accuracy. A lot of the Pokemon gyms in this game fall flat, but a lot of them are bangers. Like, you have Tate and Liza and Norman, whose gyms are above and beyond what you'd expect the average Pokemon gym to be if you played the last 2 generations. And then you randomly get thrown a curveball like Brawly, and it's like, what does fighting types have to do with a randomly dark room, and how does beating a trainer cause the lights to go on, and then you're still not in a dojo? Like, the Generation 1 fighting dojo is a better fighting gym than Brawly's gym, and it will just never get out of my head. I give this category a 5 out of 10. Nothing super impressive, but nothing super unimpressive either. I just wish they would have done more with the graphical upgrades that they've had from the last 2 generations and put a little bit more love and care into the gyms. Sometimes you walk into a gym in this generation and you don't actually know what type you're about to face. It's just completely off the rails of what it could possibly be, and there's very few options to begin with, so it's kind of ridiculous that there's even a so-so saying between it. So with that, 5 out of 10 is where I stand. On to the next category. The Pokemon selection. Now, every single Pokemon in this game that's at a version difference isn't exactly like game breaking or decision making worthy, unless it's a particular favorite of yours for any specific reason, which I'm not here to judge. I don't really care what your favorite Pokemon is. Well, I kind of am. I'm autistic, but either way. For the most part, the Pokemon selection in this game is quite solid. I have no disgruntlements towards the game incentivizing you to trade with a friend who has another copy of the game. I actually think it's quite good for the longevity of the game to continue to keep adding version exclusives so people are forced to talk with one another rather than just having everything right on it. Mind you, this is different to just locking half the Pokemon behind the post-game, which this game does not do. Of course, as I said, Generation 3 does lock Rayquaza behind the post-game, which makes no sense. But, you know, what can you do? Cry about it? I don't know. I think that the Pokemon selection across the board and all the new Pokemon they've added routes this game up at about a 7 out of 10. I do think they could have done significantly better with the Pokemon that they had and the newer designs that they were doing. I think a couple of them fumbled the bag, and a lot of them aren't as memorable as you think they are. But then again, this is the game that gave us Zigzagoon, so I'm happy either way. Mightyena, my goat as well, one of my favorite dog Pokemon. But that's just me being biased, so I'm scraping that from the board and keeping this game at a firm 7 out of 10 for the Pokemon selection. And we'll be moving on to the next category. My overall feelings of Generation 3 Pokemon. As I've stated a few times, this is the bell curve for the Pokemon games. This is where we finally hit that moment where Game Freak and Nintendo have realized that they have hit a cash cow in the gaming market, and they finally decide to lock in. It's showcased in the fact that there is an actual legitimate story that doesn't feel kind of just bum-rushed or non-existent. There is, the higher quality graphics, the newer Pokemon, the version exclusives, the variants, the new abilities, all the new battle mechanics. This game truly did bring a lot. The newer, or the future generations finally polished those up. But this game is that final egg that cracks and pushes all the cartons off the top. Every single thing about this game is a stepping stone to the things you love about the future games of Pokemon. So, with that being said, I'm going to toss the overall score up behind me, and I am arguably willing to play this game again. Now, mind you, right before I finish, I have played Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which of course I mentioned before. I'll have little cliff notes for these. Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, outside of adding the Megas to the game, arguably isn't worth playing to any degree unless there's some newer Pokemon that you quite like. Honestly, this is the first game where I would truly recommend it to somebody as their first game if they've never played any other Pokemon games before. I'd tell someone to play Emerald over the Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire remakes. Now, of course, if they're an already Pokemon fan and they're just asking me if playing Oris is worth it, I would tell them, yeah, you could play Omega Ruby or Alpha Sapphire, but pick up Emerald. Genuinely, replay it again. It's quite a good game. So I'm going to go ahead and toss the score up, and then we'll slingshot over to the next game category. Why is it that the only thing I can tend to find out here is ghost types and random bugs? Where are all the fire types? Curse you, day and night cycle! Finally, the DS era of Pokemon. We have reached Generation 4, baby. We're running it down, and so we're going to go ahead and get it started off real quick with the starters. Now, we have Chimchar, Piplup, and Turtwig, and I'm about to make a lot, and I mean a lot of people mad. But that is obviously why I am making an opinion-based video, because I just assumed I was going to be making people mad off the rip. I'm going to run you down the list, okay? So, Chimchar, Monferno, and Infernape, that's solid. Arguably one of the best fire starters in the series. You know, the true firefighting type. It makes a lot of sense. Okay. Turtwig, Grovyle, and Torterra, actually some of the most solid grass-type starter we've ever seen. And then you have Piplup, the cute little guy, and Empoleon the Emperor. Now notice how we missed one. If you're going to look me dead in the face and tell me Prinplup, of all Pokemon, is even an A-tier selection, I'm going to come through the screen and slap the blue light off your face. Now, to be fair, 8 out of 9 is incredibly solid. Sadly, that is only going to get you a 9 out of 10 in the category. Why did they make Prinplup look like that? It's an actual hate crime to my eyeballs. And you could argue, well, it's a different type of penguin. I don't care. It makes absolutely no sense in the progression of Piplup as a whole, but it's just so ugly, it makes Crocodile look like the better of the two. And that's where you lose me, really, because anything worse than Crocodile is a hate crime. Argue with a wall. I'm going to go ahead and slingshot it to the next category. The tutorial. I feel like a lobotomy would have been more engaging than this game's tutorial. Feel free to sit through a 30-minute animation as a gloved hand points to the Pokeball selection or to the battle selection to tell you how to play the game. And I think that's overkill for even a 9-year-old. Just a dialogue box would suffice. But this game does have one of the best battle tutorials in the game, properly explaining how abilities and such work, plus with the addition of an actual trainer school that teaches you the ins and outs of everything that the game has. Generation 4 has a solid 7 out of 10 in the tutorial category. It's still a bit mind-numbing at certain aspects of it, but you do get all of the gameplay information in a reasonable amount of time. It's just the way they explain it is incredibly overkill and at some point overbearing to the average person who has played the game once before. That's why it gets a 7 out of 10. If it's the first game you've ever played, it does a pretty good job at explaining it. Just again, it really dumbs it down for you, so I'm just going to go ahead and sling on to the next category. The rival, Barry Allen, the fastest man alive. Now, I gotta get through this section quick or else I'm gonna owe him $20 bajillion, which is something that he consistently brings up. Something about money drives this man to success. Typically considered a bit annoying at times and a bit off the rails, unhinged. The very first thing he does when you meet him is try to jump over a patch of grass that has vicious Pokemon in it, and he's really just do a ride or die from then on for the rest of the game. A lot of the game journals that I've seen and the official website considers Dawn a rival as well, but if I'm being honest, she's just kind of that chick that the professor has following her around. It's not really any relevance besides the fact that, oh, she has the third of the starter Pokemon, and that's really it. Barry's really your main guy throughout the entirety of the game. And with that, a lot of people think Barry is, oh, he's so annoying, and oh, he's so unwitty, and oh, he gives me little brother vibes, and I can't take him. And I think you're haters. Every single one of you. A rival doesn't have to sit there and kick you down at every single turn to be your rival. He is a main story aspect. He is there at the lakes with you. He is there through all of your gym battles. He's there when you're trying to beat up that 20-year-old depressed guy who looks 40. Every single thing about his character evolves throughout with you, and he keeps going through greater heights with you to keep up. When he finally loses that one battle against, I believe her name is Saturn, don't quote me on that, he is upset. He wants to be as good as you are. He doesn't want anyone else to help him. I think he's one of the better, if not the best, developed rival character there is in the entirety of Pokemon, alongside the rival of Gary Motherfucking Oak. Alright? And I think that's some pretty good merit to be giving an individual for the Generation 4 Pokemon games. Being compared to Gary Oak, the original rival. That's some pretty good praise. He's way better than Brendan, who barely exists in Silver, who might as well be deleted from the story. If you remove Barry, the entire game story plays out completely differently. He is a massive core inspiration for every single step of the way of your journey. And with that, I'm going to be giving the rival of this game, Barry Allen, the fastest man alive, an 8 out of 10. I would rate it higher, however, Dawn is considered a rival, so she, of course, knowingly drags down the rankings. Because, well, Dawn in its entirety doesn't need to exist. Obviously, it'll be the guy or whatever if you pick the girl at the start of the game, but I'm just not even going to get through all of that. It's Dawn. It's Dawn to me anyways. Yeah, she's quite literally irrelevant. She has the other starter, that's it. She's the reason why it's 8 out of 10. So enough of the Yap Fest. Let's go ahead and jump over to the next category. The story. Generation 4's story is actually terrible. Now that I've piplupped the entire Generation 4 fan community, and I will probably be killed in my sleep tonight, I need to explain to you that how bad this story actually is, and why you, yes, you have been lied to from the kid version of you who played this game for the first time when you got it for Christmas, okay? You are going through a burner tutorial right off the rip of the game, and then you are finally let loose. To which, you then slowly get random exposition about this random team who happens to be stealing power. Whoop-de-doo. You consistently run into them every once in a blue moon doing this, and they seem like basically checkpoints. However, for the most part, you are consistently urged to just do your gym badges. So you get 1 gym badge, 2 gym badge, 3 gym badge, 4 gym badge, 5 gym badge, and for the most part, all of nothing is happening. It's Generation 1 all over again. The only reason why you're fighting the grunts at the very beginning of the game or the middle of the game is because they are more so in the way rather than actually being a convincing part of the story. You have no idea what Cyrus is even doing throughout the entire game. He's just some creepy dude you randomly fumble into, and by the time you fumble into him, it's too late to do anything. And it doesn't even matter your entire gameplay loop. A lake blows up. Crasher Wake does not care, and you're randomly told to go to the 7th gym or whatever. And then by the time you get the 7th gym badge, the game goes, oh my god, we were supposed to put a story in that motherfucker. Randomly, Cindy wants to give you, or Cynthia, not Cindy, wants you to give medicine to Psyduck now. And it's like, dude, lady, the lake just blew up. I don't want to go talk to your grandma and give her some random pendant and cure these Psyduck. Isn't this supposed to be your job? Champion Cynthia? Oh, don't worry, I'm going to get to her in a second. God forbid, though. No, now you randomly go to her grandma's town when you enter this tunnel area where you're taught about the 3 lake guardians. But don't worry, Cyrus walks in, 20 years old looking 40, and is like, now to quote Socrates, nuts, got him. And then you battle, you beat him, the old lady goes, and then that's, well, all right, you still don't know what the is going on. You are just shingling around, just completely baffled and confused, and it's like, well, maybe I should get the last gym badge. I mean, what do we do here? And then you finally, if you are playing Diamond and Pearl specifically, I'll get to Platinum in a second, you finally get some exposition from Cynthia and then Professor Rowan about what's actually happening and how randomly on top of a mountain, some dude wants to cause a cataclysmic event which is going to basically control Z, the world, back to the beginning, and then he's going to completely create his own variation of the world. Okay, awesome. Mind you, I played Diamond and then Pearl and then Platinum, and up until the 7th gym, again, nothing is really explained to you. Go back and play these games. You, as a kid, have been lied to by yourself. I don't know what sort of thing about this story makes people love this game so much, because there is no story. Then you finally arrive on this random illicit mountain that you needed a bunch of HMs to even get through to begin with, which, by the way, the HMs are in the most obscure locations, because that's awesome. I just felt like mentioning that. You go up a pillar thing, and you fight insert box art legendary. You beat the commanders in a double battle or whatever. You beat the guy, throw the Master Ball, and okay. Now that you've just spent 5 hours battling grunts and lakes and you beat Cyrus, go get the 8th gym badge and the game is over. Awesome. If you're playing Platinum, you get to especially go to the Distortion world, which has a little bit more exposition on what's going on, a little bit more details sprinkled in there from all the random people, where Azelf, Mesprit, and Uxie just sort of give you the answers to the puzzles, and Cynthia gives you a little bit of this and that. Then you get to Giratina, which is a cool little animation with both of the screens. Master Ball, go, leave 4, game's over. The story of this game is terrible. Every single time this game is mentioned, the number one complaints I always hear is, oh, there's no fire-type Pokemon or whatever. I want to make it known right here and right now, you don't hate Brilliant and Diamond and Shining Pearl because it's a chibi art form, which, by the way, is the only difference in between these games, because you can do the exact same glitches that are in the original games in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. In the very first version of the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl games, you could do the original bugs. They were, of course, later patched out because we live in a world where that happens now, but yeah, that's how one-to-one they were. That leads me into one of my favorite parts of this entire conversation topic. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I don't think that the vast majority of Pokemon fans of Generation 4 hate Brilliant and Diamond and Shining Pearl because it, has the chibi art form. No, you finally have the conscious enough brain to go through these games and realize that there is no game to play. It's not, there's no fire types. No. You have finally realized the truth, and you're just unable to accept that the Generation 4 game story sucks. You want to know how similar these two games are? In the original Brilliant Diamond and Shining and Pearl release, you could do the exact same bugs that you could do in Diamond and Pearl and Platinum. That is how similar the games are to a 1-to-1 ratio. The only difference is the chibi art form until the game updates where the bugs are removed from the game. That's it. The Generation 4 games suck. If you don't like Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, you don't like Gen 4 as a whole. The games are terrible. There is no redeeming quality at all to the game's story. The only reason why you would even possibly play it is if you got the game when it first came out and coincidentally were a child at the time. I truly and always tell people to never play Generation 4 Pokemon games as your first Pokemon game, because if you do, you will not like Pokemon. And I'm actually surprised this game even has a minor fan base. I feel like most people that are fans of this game played it once when they were a kid and then never touched it again, which is why they hold such a strong opinion of the game. You could argue I'm biased or whatever, but I also played this game when it came out. That's how ridiculous this is. Actually, not true. I played this game right after Black and White, but I was also a child when this game was played by me. So it's ridiculous. There's no general bias. This is unbiased that I could. I even tried to clear that viewpoint of it and play through it again. These games are why this video took so long. I genuinely couldn't just sit through and suffer with these games' story, so I inevitably just took breaks, week breaks at a time between each playthrough, because I had to play through Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Brilliant Diamond, and Shining Pearl. I wanted a lobotomy, okay? It was terrible. Story of this game, 0 out of 10. The worst story in all of Pokemon. And that's saying a lot, because Gen 1 doesn't even have a story. Cynthia's trash. Moving on to the next category. Now, the graphics. One of probably the only shining lights in the entirety of Generation 4's Pokemon games. Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, unironically, have some of the solid graphics for the DS era of Pokemon. I don't think a single person has ever looked at these games and genuinely gone, oh my god, yuck. Okay, they are truly some of the best graphics ever brought to the DS, and I will let this game have that. I actually felt very immersed by the visuals of this game. It's a real shame the story is incredibly lackluster and might as well not exist. So, with that to its own regard, I think that the graphics of this game can actually get a 10 out of 10. And maybe that will help carry up the rating of this game. But I think with the way the story was, this game's probably just going to plummet right down. But I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next category so we can see how it goes. All right, we're whipping out the paper again because this is a lot of yap. And compared to the yap about the story, I can remember that story beat for the life of me. But we are going right off into the grind. Observe the writing of me at 3 in the morning. I'm going to complain more when I get to the battle section of this generation, just get ready for that. However, the grind of this game is genuinely the worst grind across all of Pokemon. I truly realized while playing this game that it's not actually a hard game. Every Pokemon on your team is just going to be consistently underleveled because there's just not enough trainers to farm EXP off of, and the wild Pokemon are ridiculously underleveled and give baby amounts of experience points. You will easily spend 10 hours in the grass fighting level 12 Pokemon before the 5th gym of the game. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but it might as well be true. Right before the Elite Four and Cynthia, who are repping level 60 plus Pokemon, you might have your starter overleveled a bit, say 62, which is what mine was at, and the rest of your team in the low 40s. If you're like me and evenly spread the experience points, my starter was level 54 and the rest of the team was high 40s. When I entered Victory Road, I have left hundreds of dead Gravelers in those caves. Let me tell you, it should be considered a CIA black site torture to take someone... Wait, it should be considered CIA black site torture to make someone grind a Pokemon up under these conditions. Actually unplayable. Save yourself the time and just use rare candies, because if you choose the hard way, you will be fighting level 40 Pokemon in the cave leading up to the Elite Four. You know, the end of the game. They give no XP, your only option is genocide or cheats. Choose. 0 out of 10, wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy to deal with this game's grind. Now for the battles. I'm not going to be one of those people who sit there and give you the hot take that, oh, the early Pokemon games are only difficult because when you played them, you were a 3-year-old child who didn't know any better. No, this Pokemon game is terrible because of the grind I was talking about earlier and the EXP ratio that you get as you're playing through the game. By the time you reach the end of the game, you have severely underleveled Pokemon and no means of getting them up in a reasonable time manner, which often causes the shift in the difficulty becoming absurd because you were just consistently underleveled. There's nothing you can do when you are underleveled in this game besides, well, sit down and grind. So, I, to prove a point, purposefully battled Cynthia with Pokemon that were 10 levels lower than her, just to prove how much of an absolute joke she is. Because usually, to the average little Timmy that plays through this game, you have your overleveled starter, and Infernape can get diffed by Milotic and Garchomp, and Polion can get diffed by, say, the Roserade and the Garchomp, and then your Torterra can get diffed by the Togekiss, or depending on what game they're playing, the Garchomp and the Lucario, which creates a game state where once your overleveled starter Pokemon gets O-code by an Earthquake, or vice versa, O-code by Milotic or whatever, your level 40s and the rest of your party fizzle out and die because you weren't able to transfer enough experience to the rest of your Pokemon to be worth the fight. Cynthia is one of the weakest champions in all of Pokemon outside of her Garchomp, the only Pokemon, actually, and her Milotic, which are the only 2 Pokemon that are actually threatening on her entire team, and her team is arguably poorly built. The only redeeming quality for the Gen 4 battle system is the physical special split, which makes half the Pokédex roster actually usable. Outside of this small change, the Pokédex continues to be a complete waste of time, and the battle section is a mediocre example of why absurdity should never be confused with difficulty. It is absurd that you're expected to beat Cynthia with such underleveled Pokemon, and the fact that I was able to do it, of course, you could simply argue, well, you're older now, you knew what you were doing. I walked in there with a Luxray, alright? The same Pokemon you brought in when you were a child, just 10 levels lower, and I proved how much of a joke Cynthia actually was, which... Again, you could still argue that I'm an adult now, but no. I truly believe that these battles are jokes. The only reason why they were tough is because your Pokemon were underleveled, because the game's design is terrible. On to the next category. The music. Alexa, play Barry's theme. Anyways, yes, this will be a reoccurring joke I use to showcase my favorite song in the Pokemon category of each game. Yeah, I can go on and on and on and on and on about how Pokemon is a musical masterpiece. However, I don't think I need to really hinge on this category anymore. It's basically a free 10 for the rest of Pokemon, except for one game in the rest of the series. So, I'm going to go ahead and slam dunk this one in 10 out of 10, and move on to the next category. The gyms. Yet another shining saving grace for this generation of Pokemon. Every single gym in this game was nailed right on the head. They all make extreme sense with what is exactly happening or what the gyms are supposed to be showcasing. Every single time you walk into a gym in this game, you know exactly what type you're walking into. Going into Crash or Wake, you know what type you are arriving in. This is arguably one of the best gym layouts and puzzles and showcasing of all of these types in the entirety of Pokemon, giving this game another 10 out of 10, which is quite shocking given that this game has the lowest of lows and highest of highs. I'm talking so high it almost goes over the green screen behind me. It's a little funny at times, but also quite ridiculous that they couldn't manage to find a middle ground. Some games are quite, dispersed, but this game just shoots for the moon or shoots to the ground, and there's no in between around here or anything like that. So it can have its 10 out of 10 for the gyms. They're very well done, and let's go on to the next category. The Pokemon selection, what we've all been waiting for. Now, I'm not going to be one of those people that gives the riveting hot take that, this generation has no fire-type Pokemon in it. It doesn't. You're 100% right. However, if you look at the Pokemon available to you throughout the entire game, you'll come to notice this is a recurring theme for all the types. Half the Steel types in the game, or all of the Steel types in the game, are locked behind, like, the 7th gym. The Ice types are no different, locked behind the 8th gym. Quite a lot of Pokemon you only really find at the Elite Four of the game, and, at least they're not locked behind the post-game like some games we know, but they are simply locked behind different checkpoints of the game, which creates such a wacky, environment. Now, of course, this game does offer some Pokemon in it that are fan favorites, like Bidoof and all the other god Pokemon like Arceus and such, and things like Luxray and Staraptor, which are amongst one of the fan favorites. However, given that a lot of the general Pokemon are so locked behind certain aspects of the game that most people end up just having the exact same team of insert starter, Luxray, Staraptor, B-Barrel, insert water type here, and then, probably a Rapidash or something if you didn't pick the fire type starter. It goes to say that it's a little hard to give this game any merit points when the main thing people tend to remember about the Pokemon selection is the fact that there isn't that much of a selection. Rounding this game up at a 4 out of 10, which seems more generous than it should be, but I'm going to give it that and move on to the next category. Now, the final overall takes. I don't think that the average kid that played through this game for the very first time, proper Gen 4ers, will agree with a lot of the things I said, and I think that's because of the personal bias they have and the rose-tinted glasses. Those exact same people that disagree with me in the Generation 4 games hate Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which to me just says that I am right. Of course, it's not about being right. It's an opinionated topic. If you wish to believe these are the best games ever, so be it. But genuinely, try to clear that filter and go back and watch these games. I think you'll surprise even yourself on how ridiculous these games actually are in the terms of the story. And as I said before, this game hits the highest of highs and lowest of lows, but when it hits those lows, man, it makes the game somewhat unplayable. I would not recommend this to a first-time Pokemon player ever. I'd tell them to go play Gen 3 or heck, go play Gen 5 and skip this game altogether. So, with that in the general notes, I'm going to toss the score up back, but really quick, I also don't really know where to put Heart Gold and Soul Silver in this game. Outside Red's battle basically having steroids, there's not really much of a difference, so I just wanted to let it be known that I did also play this game. It just doesn't deserve its own category, so like the other remakes, I'm going to skip it. So let's go ahead and toss the scores up behind me. I'm going to hit a little jig as per usual, and then let's get over to Gen 5, baby. Generation 5, Black and White 1. The starters. We have Snivy, Oshawott, and Tepig, and if I'm being honest with you, I haven't seen a Pokemon as carried as hard as Tepig since Generation 2 Pokemon Chikorita. Now, I know that's a lot of slack to be slinging towards Chikorita's way. It's a pretty solid design, don't mind you, but the entire revolutionary stasis of Tepig is Fat Pig, Fatter Pig, Boar. And I think that's very uninspiring and kind of mildly uncreative, if I'm being honest. There's no actual, overarching design. Oshawott and Snivy absolutely carry this line. I'd argue Snivy is kind of on the weaker end of carry, but Snivy and Servine and then the full snake mode thing is at least more interesting than Pig, Fatter Pig, and Boar. Obviously, Oshawott has shades of Trico line over here. Oshawott, Duat, and Samurott showcasing the equivalent of Peak when it comes to Pokemon design. I swear I'm not biased. Ending up this entire generation's core with a crisp 8 out of 10 in the rankings. I'd love to give it more, but again, as I said, Tepig really does drag this line down, and Oshawott and Snivy are doing every single thing that they can. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the next category. The tutorial. Now, the tutorial of this game is arguably more mind-numbing than that of Generation 4's. The entirety of it involves you just mashing through the A button as aggressively as you can, because there is so much overarching dialogue for this game that it gets a little ridiculous at points, and I wouldn't blame anybody for mashing through this, if I'm being quite honest with you. There's even some sections that you can effectively skip entirely. Now, I would like to note that, does it do a job at least explaining to you what's going on? Sure, that could be argued, but I don't think that, dumping 2 hours worth of text box on you to explain to you the general things of what's going on with the Pokemon games is, necessary. I don't need Bianca to walk to each individual part of the Pokemon Center. Just give me the gist or, 1 or 2 dialogue boxes worth. Mayhaps. It's a little ridiculous that this becomes a rhythm game at a certain point where you're just mashing A as much as you can. So with that being, completely overdone, I'm going to give this game a 4 out of 10 in the tutorial section, and then move on to the next part so we can get a little more interesting with it. The rivals. Sharon and Bianca are the best rivals in the middle of the packs of Pokemon. By that I mean from Gen 3 to Gen 7, this is where we have hit the nail right on the head. Showing shades of Gary Oak's level of quality when it comes to rivals, we have Sharon and Bianca. Sharon, of course, being that battle prodigy, strength-driven one that helps push you to greater heights in the battle category, and Bianca being that self-sold, proper friend. This is the beginning of the friend archetype when it comes to rivals. Kind of a burning of the flames when it comes to Bianca and what she brings to the table. But first, we're going to focus on Sharon. Sharon, throughout the entire story, has probably one of the best character development streaks throughout the entirety of Pokemon. His original goal constantly being challenged by the ideologies of the random gym trainers and gym leaders and Elite Four members and Champion Alder that he talks to throughout the entire journey. Sharon wants to be strong, but doesn't know what he's going to do when he gets there. His ideals is constantly argued against, or at least pushed out against him, and he truly has these epiphanies where he himself doesn't really know what his goal actually is outside of just getting stronger, just like you, the player, except there's more to it when it comes to him because, obviously he's a secondary character, can actually have proper dialogue, so it allows him to consistently develop throughout the entire story with your journey until he eventually hits that climactic overshoot where it hits him like a brick. He finally realizes that he doesn't even know why he's doing what he's doing. It forces him to look in and figure out why he's even in the situation he's in, which, eventually gets figured out in the secondary games, but we'll get to that in a moment. And I think this showcases that Pokemon can and should consistently keep up this level of quality when it comes to the rivals and story. I have no idea how in future generations they only hit this head one more time. It's ridiculous. Transitioning over to Bianca, she is the proof that your rival doesn't have to kick you down every single time it's convenient to be convincing. Sharon didn't really do that either. I'm just, especially doing it with Bianca. She is that friendly archetype that many people hate in the future generations. She knows right out the gate. She's never really trying to be the strongest trainer. She's just trying to be strong in her own right. From originally starting out as someone whose parents barely let her out of the house, she slowly but surely tries to break out of her shell to the best of her ability. She understands her role in life. She never tries to take that battle aspect. She's a bodyguard for people, or she's pursuing or pursuing this and that. She's not really trying at any given point in time to break that barrier until they say the end of the game, which is her overarching character type. She is just playing her role in life because she is trying to figure out what her role is supposed to be outside of just Insert character number 2. She is truly just doing her best, and you have to applaud her for that. She is a consistent revelation that you do not have to simply be the strongest to play your role in life. Her character overarching story is peak. 10 out of 10 for the rivals. I couldn't argue a score any lower than that if I tried. And I understand I'm wearing a Hilbert costume, Pokemon Black and White, but I promise I'm trying to be as unbiased as I possibly can. Replay through these games. Truly, read the dialogue. It is some of the most engaging rival dialogue I've seen throughout the entirety of Pokemon. So 10 out of 10, moving on to the next category. The story. Now, if you gave me only one word to describe Pokemon Black and White's story, you'd have to shoot me. Not because I wouldn't have a word to say, but because I wouldn't be able to stop talking. So as to avoid this being a yap session that lasts 3 days until I die of dehydration, I'm going to try to summarize this to the best of my possible ability. This story is absolute peak. It is the epiphany of Pokemon. From here on out, I'm allowed to be as harsh as I want with the rankings because Pokemon has finally showcased that they can actually make a story that's worth something. Now, with that being said, right out the gate you run into Ghetsis, who immediately questions your entire ideals and belief systems on how the Pokemon world actually works. He is showcasing to the entire world that we keep the Pokemon in balls, and of course they're forced to do as we say. We own them. You should all release your Pokemon right out the gate. A few people and trainers of the likes all are questioning this, and they have realized that they've lived these comfortable lives and have helped Pokemon, but do the Pokemon really want this? Which, as we know, obviously Pokemon are our friends, but it does beg a genuine question. As we later on find out, of course, Ghetsis only wants us to release his Pokemon, so he has absolute control over all Pokemon, and in that same right can then have complete control over the world, but we'll get to that in a second. The constant inclusion of the gym trainers and the Elite Four and Alder is also such a massive leap as far as the Pokemon world is concerned when it comes to every single character in the story having a major plot point, even if it's only for the moment that they're in the scene. Every single character you're introduced to is relevant in some way, shape, or form to the finale of the game. Whether it be Lenora in the museum helping you with some grunts, Berg in the forest helping you with some grunts, or Bryson later on in the game helping you in Dragon Spiral Tower. There's no just random miscellaneous character that serves zero purpose in the entire game besides just to give you a gym badge. Every single character plays some pivotal role, especially your rivals in In, who In is just the ulterior of your situation and has been manipulated by Ghetsis into believing he's some alleged hero of the world, and that Ghetsis' truth or ideals, depending on which game you play, is the only way to think in life, and he was never really given that chance to form any other opinions. However, throughout the entire story, he himself even questions whether or not Ghetsis is true because he meets you, the trainer, who has showcased that you can just be friends with Pokemon. One of the rarer sights, which is sad to see. However, throughout the entire story, just like with Sharon and Bianca, they're slowly chipping away at his character type until he inevitably has that breaking point. But by the time he hits that breaking point, he truly believes it's too late for him, which creates the most cinematic battle of the entire series where the Inn's castle arrives. But don't worry, those gym leaders I mentioned, they're there to help you fight the 7 sages so that you can push through the rest of the castle and battle Ghetsis and Inn in that climactic finish. The story of this game is the epiphany of peak. 10 out of 10. There is not a single ounce of dialogue wasted. I truly believe if we took every single politician and forced them to play this game, it might actually reflect on some of their worldviews and make them question things. Then again, when it comes to politicians and questioning things, as long as there's money involved, they won't tend to ask those. Obviously, I'm just joking. Moving on to the next category. 10 out of 10 for this. Let's keep the ball rolling. The graphics. Now, this being basically the last, obviously Black and White 2 is out, the last proper pixel art game, they have really pushed it as far as it can possibly go. The 2.5D cinematics and the illusionary tricks have finally reached such a point where they know what they're doing. They mess around with the engine all the time. All of the visuals in this game are quite literally some of the best. I'd actually say some of the visuals in this game are better than Black and White 2, which is the game that comes out next. And to some extreme, obviously I'm not allowed to use that one as an example because it came out after. I just feel the need to bring it up because it really pushes home the point that Black and White 2 does the graphics just right. All of the cinematics of the Inn's castle utilizing both of the screens. And again, they use 2.5D. No 3D modeling or anything of the sort. All the little sprites and the cute figures in this game having your own little jumping animation. You got Scraggy pulling his pants up and jibbing around, whatever. You got Crocodile kind of cranking that Soldier Boy a little. No idea what's up with that. Every single small little loving detail almost kind of showcases how much love and care was actually put into this game's design choices. When people often think about those cute little animations and such that the Pokemon used to do, they think of this game because this game has just about every single ounce sprinkled in there that they could possibly want throughout the entirety of Pokemon, winding this game up on a solid 9 out of 10 on the graphics scale. Now, I know I just praised it to Kingdom Come, but I need to make it a point to, showcase this. Obviously, the way a game visually looks is heavily opinionated. I can argue with you all day, but at the end of the day, you can decide whatever you want for it. And I truly believe that hanging on to this old style of games and putting it above every single thing we get in the new age is a ridiculous way of thinking. I want there to be a constant wiggle room for improvement when it comes to the visual quality of games, because in a single player game aspect, the story and the visuals are some of the most important things, at least to me. So as much as I can sit here and appreciate the black and white game style, the UI and everything else that goes into it, graphics wise, I do still think that the future progression we've made, albeit again I'm not allowed to use that, is something that we should continue to strive to perfect and improve upon until, who knows, maybe at some point we'll reach 4D graphics. Obviously that's a little ridiculous because, science or math, I don't know which one. But yeah, I think that this is a 9 out of 10 on the graphics. And you know what? I'm hopeful for the future generations of games from this point on that they will inevitably hit that 10 out of 10 peak and truly satisfy the graphical need of me, of all people. So moving on to the next category, the grind. Now this game is a little weird when it comes to the grind. I know I've said a little weird quite a lot this video, but bear with me here. This is yet another consequence of the game expecting you to not just catch 6 Pokemon right at the beginning of the game. So if you just go out of your way and, you catch a Patrat and a Pidove and a Lillipup and a Blitzel and a Swoobat or whatever right out the gate, your XP ratio will be significantly terrible. Almost every single Pokemon in your team will be ridiculously underleveled if you were trying to, do your best to keep them all around the same level. And so, if you do not grind, you'll be kind of screwing yourself for the most part. But the battles aren't really challenging enough to where being 4 levels under really causes you any major strife in life. So, Cloud Strife. It doesn't really cause you any major strife in life. And for the most part, it really doesn't matter. And then you reach this weird apex point by about the 5th or the 6th gym where you start to somewhat over-level or equal level every single thing else. So I'll give the grind of this game a 7 out of 10. I never really felt like I was stomping anybody throughout the entire game, but I also didn't feel like the game was properly synchronizing my level throughout the entire game. And unless I made a genuine effort to stop grinding past the 7th gym, I could have very easily have over-leveled the Elite Four for the first fight of the game, and it would have probably have crippled the rest of the game experience for me. So, play at your own risk, but a 7 out of 10, which is a pretty strong ranking if you ask me. The battles. Absolute cinema. Not a single battle in this game flops. None. Every single trainer, gym, Elite Four, champion, sage gets us in the rival fights. Every single trainer's team had an actual brain behind them. Whoever made these trainer teams could arguably or should have been the main lead Pokemon team designer for the rest of all of Pokemon, that I feel like this guy just did a one and done run and he only hit greens the whole way down the court. Talking corner threes all the way. It is actually insane that the quality of the battles never drops throughout the entire game. Because you'd expect at least, the 6 Magikarp guy to turn his head and then randomly give you one of the most boring battles you've ever seen. But no, The random grunts don't just paralyze you the entire game. The random bad guys don't particularly like to make your life miserable. All of the gym battles and themes actually have some sort of push and pull to them, which makes them mildly more engaging than they would have been otherwise. And again, outside of the fact that, the trainers don't have 6 Pokemon like ever, the gameplay loop of the battles is surprisingly good. And with all of that praise, they still managed to absolutely drop the bag because there's not a soul on this earth that wants to play triple battles or rotation battles. What were they thinking? Let's just add an RNG mess where 3 Pokemon are out and you can't pick a Pokemon on the other side of the stage, but flying moves can hit everywhere for some reason, and then Earthquake can't? What is even going on in this generation of Pokemon with that? It's crazy that the quality of all of the battles is so high that they had to Nancy Kerrigan this game right in the kneecaps so that they could push a lower rating on it, giving this game an 8 out of 10. Genuinely, and I mean this as real as I possibly can. If triple battles and rotation battles weren't in this, 10 out of 10, easy. 8 out of 10 just for those gameplay battle mechanics alone? It's absolutely ridiculous that they thought that was a good idea. Moving on to the next category. The music. Every single meme you've probably seen in the last 10 years, or at least, every random, YouTube video, probably has a pretty solid odds of having this generation's music behind it. Think the Toothless meme, or the Furret, Pokemon can walk, other Pokemon can fly, or shoot fire in the sky, but I can walk. I can walk. We're talking Accumulate Town, Nimbasa City, Driftville City, Undella Town. Every single, I don't even need to go through the entire list. Every single route, gym, rival battle, dude, oh my god, if you go on Spotify and you try to listen to the Team Plasma songs and such, they don't have the little lightning bolt in it, and it's so uncanny valley vibes, but even without the little lightning bolt spark, the music is still absolutely peak. I could go on and on and on every single generation about how Pokemon has some of the best music in the entire gaming world. But if you were a true Pokemon fan, you probably already have this opinion too, so there's no reason to beat you over the head about it. 10 out of 10, absolute peak. We need more Pokemon memes, okay? We need to throw some more out there, alright? Where's the Undella Town vibes? That's what we're looking for. Undella Town is my main go-to. We need that to become big so I can listen to that song every single day of my life. On to the next category. The gyms. These gyms are what I wish the Generation 3 gyms were like, if I'm being 100% honest with you. Every single gym you walk into, you know the exact type you're facing. The gym leaders have their own integral parts to play in the active story that is happening, which bumps the gym's ranking to an all-new high. The visuals in each gym is insanely good. All of the puzzles are very well appreciated and actually quite difficult in some parts. Everybody's picked the wrong book in Lenore's gym once or twice because it actively baits you with that Tepig one, if we're being honest. I truly think that if they just kept up this standard of Pokemon, we'd be in a much better place right now for the future games, which I will inevitably get to those. But the gyms in this game are some of the best in the entire series, which is just another banger that this game throws at you. This is a firm 10 out of 10 as far as I'm concerned. Every single gym is perfect. And again, need I remind you, the gym leaders are actually important to the story, which is massive, and only seen again for the next handful of generations, and then they forget the gym leaders exist, and then we go back to where we are. But for now, we can enjoy it while we have it, so 10 out of 10, moving on to the next category. The Pokemon selection. This game got absolutely shafted by the fan base for only showcasing Pokemon in the Generation 5 loop. That being said, only Generation 5 Pokemon can be found until effectively the post-game, or unless you trade, which is, obviously a choice that you can make whenever you feel like. And I think that this game being hated for that is absolutely ridiculous. God forbid Pokemon try something a little bit different in their, massive minds and try to give you an experience that you've never had before. Not just shoving Pidgeys and Staraptors in your face right off the rip. You have to use the new Pokemon, which creates an environment where you can experience a whole new world of Pokemon, which is the entire point of the game. Now, with that being said, and how the Pokemon basically shift your entire journey, I will then go even further to say that Pokemon Generation 5 has some of, if not the most forgettable Pokemon in all of Pokemon. Okay? LGM and BDM completely forgettable. Like, Volibee and Mandibuzz were only really relevant because of their VGC compatibility. Let's go on a couple of more. Trubbish is a literal garbage can. I'm struggling to even, whatever the heck. Hold on, I have a list. These Pokemon are so forgettable, I had to make a list on a piece of paper because I quite literally forgot. Hold on. Yeah, Patrat and Watchog, mid. Compared to Pokemon like Zigzagoon and Bibarel, they're a pretty mediocre Route 1. There's LGM and Behem. I put Mandibuzz down. Blitzel and Zebstrika are literally just zebras. Trubbish and Garbodor are just straight garbage. And mind you, Excadrill, I literally have a plush of him, is one of my favorite Pokemon of all time. And even I can argue that if he didn't have any competitive viability, he would probably be forgotten too. There's probably a few Pokemon of this generation that I myself am completely forgetting to include in how forgettable they are. So, despite the fact that this generation is bearing an entirely new pool of Pokemon that are your only options, it's not like Lillipup is really breaking the mold of the dog-type Pokemon archetype. You probably forgot that Pokemon existed, because so did I. I literally had to keep it written down so that I remember to properly complain about this. So, I give this game a solid 5 out of 10, right down the middle. Impressive that they were able to add so many new Pokemon and make them the only Pokemon you were allowed to use, but on the other hand, it's kind of disappointing that these Pokemon are just very forgettable and not really that crazy as far as anyone else is concerned. Moving on to the next category. Now, my overall feeling. Pokemon Black and White is somewhat of a one-and-done type of game. You play it, you enjoy every single corner and small little detail it has, and then that's it. That's your experience. That is your Pokemon journey. I would tell everybody to play this game at least once because of how good the story is. But once you know all the twists and turns and pulls, it kind of becomes like a movie where you know what's going to happen. And knowing what's going to happen doesn't exactly take away from the journey. But that first experience you have with this game will truly hit and linger for probably the rest of your life if you even pay the slightest bit of attention to what's going on. I do think that a bit of personal bias might have slipped out. This, of course, being my first Pokemon game. I refuse to be like those Gen 4 people that just think the first game I played is peak. However, I do truly believe, having replayed through Black and White 2, that this is the epiphany of what Pokemon should always be shooting for, and the fact that we inevitably lose this quality down the road, of course with my foresight I know this, it really does sadden me as a Pokemon fan that we couldn't keep this up. So, as I've always done, I'm going to toss the overall scores up behind me, hit a little jig, and then we'll segue into Black and White 2. Black and White 2. Now, obviously, as every single game has gone by, I've started out the game with the starters. However, it seems a little redundant to do it for this game, given, it's the same starters. Oshawott, Snivy, Tepig. 8 out of 10. Don't need to re-explain myself. Let's go ahead and jump over to the next category where things get a touch more interesting. The tutorial. Now, surprisingly, they actually fixed up the tutorial and kind of corrected every single complaint I originally had with the first game. So the tutorial gets an upstanding record of 8 out of 10, which is surprising across the entirety of Pokemon games. They explain it pretty well in the beginning. You walk up, Bianca explains the Pokédex, your rival explains the maps and the general gist. You get your little Baddock, the battle mechanics are over. You get the Pokemon Center stuff, and they don't really bombard you with dialogue. They just show you, go, this is it, and then they let you loose, which I can appreciate. A tutorial doesn't need to take 20 business days, but you should at least have the general information of what you need to know prior to getting into the game. So, a solid 8 out of 10. Let's move on to the next category. The rival. Now, this game saw Pokemon Black and White 1 and went, wow, let's do none of that. Hugh is a rival, if you can even consider that. He kind of fits that childhood friend archetype, I guess, for the most part. You know of him and his sister and his family, you went to their birthday parties and all that stuff. But But Hugh is not even really a rival. He's not a part of your story. He doesn't care what you're doing. Hugh's entire character personality revolves around this purloin, which is now a Liepard, which you learn later in the story, that was taken from his sister by Team Plasma 2 years prior to this game coming out. Outside of this small little blip, he does nothing the entire game. Sure, he's there, but he doesn't care about you or the story. He doesn't even really care to defeat Team Plasma in the entirety of it. He just wants this singular Pokemon back. And every single time you run into him, it's like Barry with telling you that you need to give him $1 million if he beats you to insert location number 3. Except he gives you constant exposition about this purloin that you just don't care about. Ever. It's like, I get it, man. That's cool and all. But Ghetsis is trying to nuke the world in ice. Your purloin is completely irrelevant to the plot right now, and that's literally only identity this character has. He doesn't grow, he doesn't realize the error of his ways or how it's a little ridiculous to simplify the entirety of defeating Team Plasma down to a Pokemon. Heck, at the end of the game, when he gets the Liepard back, that's it. He's like, oh, well, time to go home now. And he leaves. He serves 0. You could remove him from the game, and the game would play the exact same. The only redeeming set for him is that the battles against him are actually quite engaging and somewhat difficult. So, you know, he gets some merit points, I guess, but 3 out of 10. Terrible. The past generations of Pokemon have had leagues better rivals than this guy. Throw him in a box and move on to the next category. Story. Now, I know I sat there and basically glazed Pokemon Black and White 1 for how amazing it was, so you'd think I'd come in here ready to shell out for this game all the same. However, this game's story is quite underwhelming on every single degree that it could possibly hit. It's like they saw everything that Black and White did and how crazy and beautiful they did, combining all of the characters and development, and went, what if we did none of that? Alright, cool. It's absolutely ridiculous that this game shares the same name as the original Black and White 1, because the only thing it tends to take from it is the assets and the characters, and then does nothing with them but completely crap on every idea they possibly could have had. The gym leaders are basically stand-in characters. The Elite Four and the champion are irrelevant. Sure, you still run into Alder all the time, but he's not the champion anymore. He's just some dude who runs the trainer school you run into at the beginning of the game and then becomes irrelevant like everything else in this game. Yeah, it's cool to see all these past characters like Sharon, but he's completely irrelevant. Bianca gets a bit of spotlight being your professor, and you run into her quite often throughout the entire story. But again, that doesn't beat the point that they don't do anything to connect the two stories. The only thing they share is the name alone. With Hugh constantly complaining about the purloin, Ghetsis going completely psycho, the question is never answered, and there's conspiracy theories about it, but Ghetsis has whichever dragon you had in the original game, so if you're playing Black 2, he has the Reshiram, or vice versa, and he combines it with Kyurem, but the original protagonists, Silvert and Hilda, are completely irrelevant and don't exist in the story. Some people think they were murdered by Ghetsis, or some people think they ran away by Red. At least Gold and Silver, a game that came out so long ago, had the decency to put Red back in the game as a cool little battle to kind of shill your way out of there. But no, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing in this story that connects it to the original games outside of the characters being in it. The gym leaders do nothing. This is an actual disgrace to the original game, and the fact that they share the names is disrespectful. They just wanted to cash in on the success of Black and White 1? I don't know. Maybe if this game had like 1 more year, they could have developed the story a little better. But I don't care to make a movie with you, Bryson, man. Please, just give me an actual convincing story. It's like they just decided to randomly crap on every single thing that the original game did. Black and White 1 is what I'm referring to, and instead give us a shell-less corpse of the Pokemon series. It's ridiculous to even consider this a Pokemon game and story alone because it's so bad. I'm going to give it a crisp 4 out of 10. The only redeeming quality is the fact that, you know, the characters are still somewhat advanced, and I do like the attempts to bring Sharon and Bianca back, but honestly, 4 out of 10 feels too generous, and I might even lower it in post, because it's a little ridiculous that this game is even a thing. They could have just skipped this game entirely. I could not willingly recommend this game to somebody out there unless they've completed Black and White 1 and they just want to see their characters again. You could skip this game entirely and nothing would matter. Hugh gets deleted, nothing changes. Iris gets changed to different, nothing changes. Getsus is whatever, nothing changes. Running in the inn is cool and all, but nothing changes. It's a completely ridiculous shill, and I'm going to be moving on to the next category now. The graphics. Now, I know I said that Black and White 1 was obviously like the last in the series, but of course I referred to Black and White 2 as well. I'm just going to slap a 9 out of 10 on this category because for similar reasoning, I'm not going to give you the whole Socrates speech about how graphics are a constantly changing thing and your opinions are allowed to change, and etc, etc, etc. I'm just going to slap a 9 out of 10 on it and move on from there, and hopefully you can form your own opinions on what graphics you enjoy. I know that's the point of the video, for me to give my opinion, but again, I feel it kind of unnecessary to sit there and just flounder you about how I believe these graphics to be as good as they are, but obviously there's always room to improve. So, 9 out of 10, moving on to the next category. The grind. Now, I think this is that final breaking point where Game Freak stopped caring about the quality of battles and the XP gains that you get. They really just nailed it right in the basket when it comes to Generation 5 Black and White 1, and then decided to completely sell the bag when it came to Black and White 2, and the EXP share showcased this. You need to consistently go out of your way to constantly get XP across all your Pokemon, as you do in every single game of Pokemon, but it's very easy in this game to either wind up with a ridiculously over-leveled starter, or, if you're properly dispersing XP, have a mildly under-leveled team by the end of the game. And, of course, I can sit here and blame it on the fact that no trainers have 6 Pokemon except basically the champion at the end of the game, but that's just blatantly not true. It feels like the EXP distribution and the amount of random trainers and such is just limiting. There are very few trainer battle interactions in this game, and I promise I went through and tried not to skip any. I battled every single one I could. So it kind of created this, like, flattening feeling by the end of the game where it didn't really feel like a journey had partaken because I didn't really get a lot of battles with my Pokemon to really connect with them. And mind you, it's not like I had to spend 30 hours walking through patches of grass to get as much Pokemon as I possibly could, but like, which gives it some merit points, but like, it's completely absurd that it gets to such a point where, honestly, I have to start avoiding trainers because I don't want my Pokemon to get over-leveled, and then I go back and get that XP later because now I'm ridiculously under-leveled. And then the random wild Pokemon are like 10 levels lower than the Pokemon you fight in the gyms. You literally clear a gym out that's level like 30, and then you go into the next route where the Pokemon are level 24. And it just doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to give this game a confusing 6 out of 10 when it came to the grind, because like, yeah, there wasn't really much grind, but also the quality that would have been there was so bad that I can't in good conscience put the grind any higher than a 6. Because, like, the average kid that was grinding might have had a bad time. Mind you, at least there wasn't, like, a Zubat trying to confuse me every 10 seconds, but still, it was just not engaging at all. So yeah, 6 out of 10, and I'll move on to the next category. The battles. Now, just like the grind, the battles in this game have dropped in quality compared to Black and White 1. Not as significantly as the grind has, however, the battles as a whole don't make sense at times. In Generation 1 Black and White, or in Generation 5 Black and White 1, the grunts had a limited but, fair pool of Pokemon they could pick from. There was like 5. Every single grunt had like a Liepard or a Swoobat or something. But for the most part, they were pretty tame and like they did the best they could with what they had. In this generation, somehow the grunts have more Pokemon to pick from, and yet the quality of battles has decreased significantly. It does pick up later, because like battles like with Getsus and the Elite Four and the Champion Iris are actually quite difficult. All of them have a chance to just randomly decide they've won, by sweeping your entire team. And the quality of the gym battles and such are quite high. I did mention before when I was talking about Hugh that his Pokemon team is at least hard to battle against, which is the only redeeming quality for such a terrible character in the Pokemon universe. So, this is another weird one because I gotta give it a disappointing 6 out of 10. It's like somehow they had more but did less, which at the end of the day just confuses me because it feels like, again, like they were rushed or they just ran out of time and they weren't given enough resources or I don't know what, but I feel like a group of 20 dudes making gold and silver had a better gameplay experience when it came to battles than this game. So I'm going to toss a 6 out of 10 up there and move on to the next category. The gyms. Now this one is a bit of a doozy, because you have like Skyla, Clay, Marlin, and a few handful others that really hit the nail right on the head when it comes to gyms. And then you randomly show up at Sharon's gym right at the beginning of the game, and you're in a dirt parking lot. And I know the explanation the game gives you is that he kind of just got there, but the quality of gym still stays the same. It's just somewhat lazy. There's no story-driven reason besides, oh, well, he just decided to become a gym leader. They could have given him at least, I don't know, a building of sorts, not just a random soccer pitch, apparently. I don't even really know what it was attempting to be, but the only thing it arrived to be was a disappointment. And then, you know, trainers like Elisa, she's just on a runway. You arrive in the building, battle trainer after trainer after trainer until you get through the 3 of them on a runway, and then you arrive at Elisa and it's like, boom, electric type trainer, and it just doesn't make sense. As I said before, when I'm looking at the gym quality, I'm looking at the ability to read and recognize the type you are playing up against. When you arrive in Sharon or Elisa's gym, you don't know. You're just sort of there. Now, obviously, if you played the original games, you'll know that Elisa used the electric type gem type, but Sharon was not really a normal type ace trainer back in his day. So it's a little ridiculous to sort of make these brooch assumptions that ultimately the game could have showcased with better design choicing. Also, the gyms just don't have puzzles anymore. Like, Clay still has his thing going on, and, you know, Skyla's still got her thing going on, but Elisa's literally just a walkway. Sharon, you just arrive at a dirt parking lot. What's up with that? Why? Berg's isn't even really a puzzle either. There's no wrong answer. At least Berg has like good design choicing, so it just kind of creates this weird environment where it's kind of hard to rank anywhere else. I'm going to give it a humble 7 out of 10. I think like this category is kind of weird because it could easily go up a point or down a point depending on like the vibes of the day, if I'm being real with you, which is not something that I would hold as a good quality in a Pokemon game, if I'm being honest. It's just sort of one of those things that you just have to take at face value and go, you know what, at least the majority of them are better. But the ones that are bad are really bad. At least the quality of the gym fights as well is high, which is why I could argue maybe an 8, but I'm going to leave it at a 7 out of 10 because of how confusing some of the designs are. Moving on to the next category. The Pokemon selection. Now, why can't you get the box art legendary in the main game? At least in Generation 1, right, you technically get it in the post game. However, you're expected to battle the Elite Four and the Champion twice. Need I remind you, in the Generation 1 Pokemon game, you go through the Elite Four and then you get cut off by In, and you have to do all of that. You do not fight Alder the first go through. The game expects you to go to the other few towns and get through all of the rest of the story in the tactical post-game, and then come back and actually finish the main game and beat Alder and then register your Pokemon in the Hall of Fame. This game doesn't get that excuse. Doesn't exist. Right when you get to the Elite Four, you are the champion. You beat Iris. There is no need for a refight, right? So why do they not give you the box art legendary of the game? You can go back through and get In's Pokemon, and then you have to go back through and get the Splicer and Kyurem. That makes no sense. Just that alone plummets this game's ranking down into the dumpster. However, this being Black and White 2, they don't actually add any proper new Pokemon to this game. None. It doesn't even have its own really merit to that category because it doesn't provide anything new except for a handful of changes to sprites and a couple small additions, but outside of that, it does nothing. 3 out of 10. Give me the legendary. Heck, even the mythicals are basically chained behind a post game, and some of the Pokemon are locked behind completing the decks, and then you unlock a new area where you can finally catch them. It's ridiculous. 3 out of 10. I'm moving on to the next category. My overall breakdown. I think that Pokemon Black and White 2 was kind of a pillar that collapsed. Every single thing about this game shows that they at least kind of maybe had an idea of what they wanted to do, and then they simply just started firing blanks down the side of Chicago. Not really a good idea if you ask me. I think that this game could have been something great, a true sequel to a really good game, but it simply just does a cartwheel off a cliff anytime it gets close to doing anything good. So, unshockingly, the ranking for this game is actually quite terrible given how late in the series it is compared to other games in, future and past. This game provides nothing. I would genuinely only recommend this game to you if you played the original Black and White 1 and you just want to experience the Unova region again. Because the story is nothing to really roll over. The characters are just the same characters from Black and White 1, but watered down. And you don't really have a reason for doing anything that you do outside of, oh, Plasma's back. I think that's just lazy story writing. So, with that final little breadbasket and everything all tied up in a neat little bow, I will be more hopeful going into X and Y because I do actually remember that game being quite good on the list. So I'm going to go and play that game now and see how it goes. I'm going to toss the overall score up behind me, and then I'll be back when I get to that, moving on with Generation 6. Now, we are finally at Generation 6. X and Y, baby. 3D all the way from here on out. Some 2.5D still, but I digress. Who cares? We have reached the 3DS games of Pokemon. And where else to start except the starters like I've done with every other category. We have Fennekin, Chespin, and Froakie. And I want to take a moment to sit here and say that I think Chespin and Chestnut are one of the most overhated starters in the entire series of Pokemon. Like, yeah, Quilladin isn't winning any beauty competitions, and I'd throw him right next to Crokinole, but I feel like Chestnut deserves a lot more representation than he's been getting, because the only thing that I've ever seen regarding Chestnut is hate or people overhating his design. I don't really see where that opinion typically comes from. Obviously, you have Froakie, Frogadier, and Greninja was basically shoved down your throats, like with Ash Greninja and everything else that was going on in that whole marketing campaign of Pokemon. So, of course, it makes sense that he rivals that of Charizard, and finally a Pokemon can take his space, and I'm not taking that from him. And I love that Fennekin finally breaks the Fire-type mold and does something different, because most Fire-type Pokemon are animal, slightly bigger version of that animal, and then a completely different animal, but like obese or something, or firefighting type number 38 million. At least Fennekin, Braixen, and Delphox try to shake that mold up with the whole witchy magician type of dealio, and I can honestly appreciate some actual intriguing design. I'm going to give these starters a firm 9 out of 10. Again, the only thing really dragging them down is Quilladin, so and I think this is a solid roster, as solid as it's going to get moving forward for future generations. So I think that a 9 out of 10 isn't even a generous offer. They've earned every single inch of it, and we need to give Chestnut some more room to breathe. We overhate that Pokemon for some reason. And speaking of, I think it's time to move on to the next category, or I'll be on this for hours. The tutorial. So, you wake up out of bed, you're immediately bombarded by a Pokemon, you have no idea what it is, and then you're kicked out of your house by your mother, to which you are then met by two spontaneous teens who have nothing to do with anything so far as you know it, but they are excited to greet you. They then take you to a random picnic table where two other teens are there, so now we have a full party of 4 going on, you make the 5th of course, and then you're asked to promptly give them a nickname. Still having no idea what's going on with the game, you give them a nickname that you think is funny, at least that's what I did, and then you realize that for the rest of the game they're going to be calling you that, and the joke gets old eventually. Moving aside from that, the game does a horrific job outside of the quick battle tutorial of telling you how literally anything works. By the time you actually learn gameplay mechanics, it's hours down the road when they eventually become relevant, but all the tutorials in the game are way too late for them to actually make an impact. I could definitely see someone of the younger demographic just kind of mindlessly wandering around with no actual input as to what they're supposed to do, unless they have played a prior generation of Pokemon, which is actually quite sad. I think I prefer when the tutorial takes 30 years to tell you every little detail through dialogue boxes like Black and White besides this, because this gives you genuinely nothing. A 1 out of 10 experience, and I think the 1 is generous, because the battle tutorial at least teaches you how to battle, but again, outside of that, you have nothing. So I'm going to move on to the next category now. The rival. Or should I say the rivals? Because Jesus, there are a lot of them, okay? Serena, Tierno, Shauna, Trevor. I hope I got all those names right, because in the grand scheme of things, having too much is just as bad as having too little. At least in my eyes, they've always been synonymous. And even though the rivals are consistently there throughout your entire journey and have some relevance to the plot, none of them have their own individual identities outside of, like, their core goal. Like, Trevor wants to complete the Pokédex. Okay, great, and that's it. They do nothing with the character. Tierno wants to learn dance moves and whatever. Okay, interesting, and that's it. Serena is the only one that consistently tries to actually battle you like a rival and cares about being the best, but in all intents and purposes fails miserably because she's just consistently overshadowed for space by the other three members. And then Shauna is like a love interest or something. I don't know. Everybody was there for the fireworks show, right? We all played through that little cutscene. I don't really know what's going on with Shauna as a character, but she's quite terrible as well. There's really no redeeming quality for the rival set for this variation of Pokemon. So I'm going to give them a 4 out of 10. 1 point for each rival, I guess. But that's just for a tad bit of a joke. Realistically, this deserves a much lower score. More is not always better, and this is a prime example of that. Moving on to the next category. The story. Now, as I mentioned right at the very beginning, you move to a new town, your Rhyhorn racing mom is finally ready to retire, you meet all the kids, you play through the games, you get a couple of gym badges, and then all of a sudden you walk into a cafe and you meet Satan. And by that I mean Lysander, who wants to completely genocide the earth and get rid of any single person that he deems not beautiful in his own right or world, going so far as to basically wipe the slate clean. However, unlike Cyrus in the past generations, he doesn't want to create a whole new universe. No. He just wants to get rid of every single person in this universe that he collectively disagrees with, or that disagrees with him, which I would argue makes him even worse than Cyrus, because at least Cyrus was going to control, Z and then kind of make his own thing. This guy is quite literally just going to obliterate the earth and keep himself and a select few alive, which is actually insane. That story obviously takes a little too long to start kicking off. I could see the first person playing through this game and getting kind of dazed off and just starting to mash A through random dialogue boxes. But if you actually read and dig into this story, right when you meet Lysander, the story completely takes off. Now, obviously it kind of sucks that the random gym leaders and the champion and such have nothing to do with what's going on in the story at any given point in time, but you gotta kind of pay your dues where they give them. The story at least makes a genuine attempt to be threatening. There is a bad guy. There is a reason for you being there. You have to completely push aside your gym challenge because you, the player, need to do things to make sure that the world doesn't end. You are a core part of this story, and you are playing your role to the best of your ability. Your rivals, however, are just random sidekicks that do nothing, which they drastically drag the points down. Also, the environmental storytelling is quite mediocre, given that the main push for this story is the cinematics, and the cinematics only showcase themselves once in a blue moon, and depending on which game you've picked, X or Y, the story might slightly change a little, but for the most part, I give this story a solid 7 out of 10. It's not like one of the best of all time, but it gets the job done for what it needs to do, be a story in a Pokemon game. I think that if they gave the rivals a little bit more definition, or perhaps made the outer characters, like the gym leaders and such, more in-depth and actually did something with them when it came to the gyms, this game could have easily have had a much higher story rating. But for what it is, I think X and Y story gets hated on a lot more than it probably should have, so give it another chance. I could genuinely see recommending this game to somebody who has never played Pokemon before. It is a genuine experience that I think everybody should at least have once. Moving on to the next category. The graphics. I will never forgive the Pokemon community for taking one look at this game and going, "It's not pixel art!" Oh my god, I'm too old to be doing that to my niece. Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous from the Pokemon community, and this is exactly why I give the past games a lower than 10 out of 10 rating. I'm also going to be giving this game a 9 out of 10. Because, and I want to make this very clear, I understand the way something visually looks is subjective. We all want things to stay the same, and everybody has something wrong with them and just can't accept change every once in a blue moon. But it's absolutely ridiculous to hold a gun to Game Freak's head and expect them to just keep piling out the same game over and over and over again. Do you actually just want Call of Duty, but in the Pokemon? No. No, you don't. You do not want the same game on repeat cycled down to you. You might want a remake of some old game you enjoyed 20 years ago with perhaps updated graphics. Oh wait, they did that and you hated it too. We as the Pokemon community have to give Game Freak a chance to cook, or else the quality of games is going to continue to plummet, because all they're going to do is keep festering out the same cycled garbage that had worked in the past. And then we are just going to reach a stale point in our gaming lives where every Pokemon game is just the same thing. Pokemon Legends ZA literally just got announced, and people are already complaining about the gameplay and how it doesn't look like normal Pokemon, and they're already arguing that they don't like all the new changes and stuff that they see, and it's like, we have to give Pokemon the opportunity. Pokemon Legends ZA isn't even a main series game, and we're already hating on it because it's not what we know and love. That is ridiculous thought logic. We need to accept that Pokemon and the Game Freak company are going to do something new with the games that they have. It makes no sense to just blindly expect them to make a one-to-one copy of the games they've already made prior. That would just get incredibly stale. So I'm going to keep the graphics of this game at a 9 out of 10. Argue with a wall. I'm tired of hearing people complaining about all the newer games and how they just don't get it like it's old and yada yada yada. Then just play those old games and stop buying the new ones, because it's getting ridiculous. We get it. You can only appreciate the games because you played them when you were 10. That's fine. But don't hate on the new one just because Game Freak doesn't want to recreate the exact same game experience every single time. I want a constantly improving system. I want to reach a day where Pokemon is perfect. I don't want the same slop from the beginning of the entirety of the inception of Pokemon in Generation 1 on repeat. Could you imagine if we were on our 30th integration of Red? It would be boring. You would hate it. You'd hate it more than people hate it on Sun and Moon. We'll get to that game in a minute, though. So, for now, I'm going to slingshot into the next category. The grind. There are plenty of trainers and wild Pokemon that consistently help you maintain your levels. However, finally, the EXP share. The EXP share that actually just gives XP to all of your Pokemon. I will be the first, the last, and I will die with this opinion. We take the EXP share for granted. Okay? Now, I do agree that in the later generations, I believe it's Sword and Shield, whenever I get to that game, I'll confirm it, that you can't turn it off in that game. However, in this game, you can. So, complain to nobody, because I'm not going to sit here and argue as to why the EXP share is the best thing to showcase the Pokemon. I will give my opinion on it though, but it's only for debate, not an argument. The EXP share actively cuts any need to actually grind at any given point in time, and once I reach a level across all of my Pokemon that I deem comfortable, I just turn the thing off so that I can just enjoy reading the story and playing the game and not walking back and forth in a patch of grass for 30 hours of my life, okay? So yeah, I like the EXP share. I'm glad it's here. And until we get to the game where you can't turn it off, 10 out of 10s from here on out, alright? Because the grind has become a godsend. And it is so easy to just cruise through the game now and have a fun gameplay experience that doesn't involve sitting in battles against wild random Pokemon for 20 hours of my life. 10 out of 10, moving on to the next category. The battles. This is where Pokemon has decided that they fired the guy from Black and White that made all the good team designs and kicked him down the road and probably hired some nepotism baby to make the battle designs. Why is Diantha the worst champion to ever exist in the history of Pokemon? She actually does make Cynthia look challenging, which is quite impressive because the only thing on Cynthia's roster that's mildly intimidating is a Garchomp and a Milotic. And then she has a bunch of poor quality Pokemon. Diantha, however, has a team so abysmal that the only thing that could probably come second to last in this general category is the Elite Four prior to her. The ending gauntlet of this game is so bad that this ranking plummeted just because of it. Why do random trainers on Route 8 have better designed teams than the literal champion of this game? That is beyond ridiculous, and the fact that it's even just the norm is delusional at best. They should have consistently have looked back at this and upped the quality. It is ridiculous that they didn't, and it's insane that something like this got by. I even put a reference in here to Flygon HG. If you've literally seen any of his videos, it's actually so absurd that the only way he can keep interest in his audience when he gets to Diantha is by literally doing little paper puppets and showcasing the battle with a cinematic Flygon specialty of just voicing over what's happening and having little VFX special effects blasting Pokemon. So shout out Flygon HG for making this generation's final battle mildly interesting, which is crazy because the actual general gameplay loop is mildly enjoyable, and then you get right to the end where they slap you in the face and go, ha, you thought it was going to be a good Pokemon game, didn't you? Enjoy the empty feeling of nothingness. And with that, I would be giving this generation a 2 out of 10. However, this generation is the generation that added Mega Evolutions. So, with that battle mechanic in mind, Mega Evolutions is probably one of, if not the most balanced variation of battle mechanics that we get from here until future Pokemon. Obviously, I'm not allowed to use future Pokemon games to determine my ranking for this, but outside of like Mega Lucario and Mega Blaziken and Mega Kangaskhan, the rest of the Megas pretty much hit the nail on the head as to what we want from a Mega variation. The new form, more power, all that good stuff. So, you know what? This game can get a 4 out of 10 on the... So, you know what? This game can get a 4 out of 10 on the battle mechanics, and a humble 4 out of 10 is that. I very easily think that you could, like, probably drop it down a point, because of, again, the final battles and such. Even Lysander's team is, like, at least mildly threatening. Again, though, what was up with the champion? On to the next category. The music. Now, again, Pokemon game. This category is kind of a blitz through. There's literally only one song in this game that I have a proper problem with, and a few of the theme songs kind of get a little ridiculous after a while. The rival battle theme songs are kind of mid. But to be fair, there are 4 rivals, so I will be giving this game a 9 out of 10 in the music category. Obviously, it could maybe be argued it's a 10 out of 10, Pokemon biased, all that good stuff. But I will agree that compared to the past generations, this does have a few songs that fall flat. Not as flat as Generation 1 Pokemon's music does, but this generation holds up to a specific degree. So 9 out of 10 is humble, and it could very easily go 10 out of 10 if those handful of songs were just honestly removed from the game. That's the end of that. I'll move on to the next category now, because the music thing is getting a little redundant. The gyms. I hate every single gym in this game. What does a Rubik's Cube puzzle have to do with Ice-type Pokemon? Why is this old dude just in a library? What is going on? Are we in outer space, lady? Whoever did battery acid prior to making these gyms, I want what you're having. And as I said in the battles category, none of their teams make any sense or have any structure. Outside of Viola's, they bring 3 Pokemon max, and it feels like the devs just picked their favorite 3 instead of making an actual team for each of these gym leaders. Stretching out of that, the Elite Four and the Champion are the exact same. They suck so ungodly bad, people often remember the way the rooms looked, sure, but nobody remembers their teams. Why? Well, because they were terrible. Also, this bugged me even when I was a kid. Gyms are sometimes known for being a little bigger on the inside than the outside, and you know what? Fair enough. It's a game. But Grant Gym? That shuckle is ridiculous. There is absolutely zero way that massive jungle gym rock climbing wall in any way, shape, or form fits in that gym that's in the side of the mountain. You enter from the top-ish of the mountain, and then you only go up to such an extreme height that the road above might as well be in the stratosphere. All of this going to say 1 out of 10. Thankfully, Viola saves them from being a straight 0, but dear God, I just can't with this game's gyms. Grant's Gym? Play the game. Look at Grant's Gym. I fucking hate it. Moving on to the next category. The Pokemon selection. Let me go ahead and list off some bangers. Talonflame, Malamar, Aegislash, Mega Aggron, all of the starters. Need I say more? I can. X and Y is known for having arguably some of the most solid and well-designed Pokédex inclusions in the entirety of Pokemon. This game easily, and I mean easily, gets a 10 out of 10. Your favorite Pokemon, or at least one of your top 10 Pokemon, probably comes from here. Gudra, anybody? This game unironically has one of the most solid dexes and a pretty solid story, which makes it a very big heavy hitter as far as the Pokemon games are concerned in my eyes. So a 10 out of 10 is where I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to keep the ball rolling, because I could genuinely talk about how well these Pokemon designs are for hours if you let me. On to the next category. My overall feelings. My overall feelings of X and Y Pokemon goes kind of off the rocks a little bit, so I'll try to summarize it to the best of my ability. I feel like this Pokemon game was never given a chance because it was hot off the press of all of the pixel art enjoyers from the original Pokemon games, and so for the most part, people dipped their toes into this game but never actually gave it a chance to read the story and get invested with some of the Pokemon and truly enjoy this game for what it was. X and Y Pokemon is genuinely one of, if not the better iterations. It's better than Black and White 2 anyways. Not better than Black and White, I'd argue, but it definitely deserves its place. I actually, having recently played these, again, X and Y, I'm recording it as I play it type of dealio, have started getting under the belief that Generation 3, 5, and 6 are all worth recommending to new-time Pokemon fans. Outside of the tutorial of this game, you might have to tell your friend a thing or two because they have no idea what's going on, this game is genuinely worth the play for a first-time player, and I could see it being many people's favorite games. So I don't get why the Pokemon community likes to shun the opinion that this game is good. It's genuinely, again, one of the more solid entries in the entirety of Pokemon. So with that, I'll be putting the overall score up behind me as I typically do, and segueing into the next generation, which should be Generation 7. Oh, quick side note for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Again, similar with the remakes, it's cool that it adds the Mega, but riding Mega Latios doesn't save you. Generation 3 is still an awesome gen. I wouldn't recommend it though. I'd actually recommend you just go back and play Emerald, unless you really care about the Megas. So yeah, anyways, on to Generation 7, Generation 7. We have finally reached Sun and Moon, one of the last games to be on the 3DS console right before the big leap over towards the Switch generation of Pokemon games. And with that, let's go ahead and kick off the starter selection of this game. You have Rowlet, Popplio, and Litten. And I'm going to be probably the first person in your life to tell you this, so maybe it's just an opinion that I personally share, but I think this generation of Pokemon starters are horrifically overrated. Now, quickly, I need to give some respect to Rowlet, who I believe is single-handedly carrying this entire generation of starters, and like Trico, is incredibly cool-looking and totally top-notch. However, Popplio, Brione, and Primarina are the most uninspired Pokemon designs I've ever seen since Meganium, Chikorita, and Bayleaf, so that's its own problem over there in a corner. And the only reason why you even know who Litten is because of Incineroar's competitive viability. It's literally cat, mildly larger cat, and then tiger. Luchadore. It's quite literally just the most garbage stage of evolutionary I've seen in the entirety of Pokemon. And honestly quite lazy. It's showing signs of Tepig, of just pig, bigger pig, bore. It's not really anything super crazy. This category gets a 5 out of 10, and all 5 of those points are on the back of Rowlet, Dartrix, and Decidueye. They literally are dragging this category on their own way. So, let's go ahead and jump over to the next category. The tutorial. Oh man, this is gonna get really exciting. This game's tutorial is 3 hours long. I made a joke about it earlier, and this is 100% legit. If you have the official handbook for Pokemon Sun and Moon, or Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the ending of the tutorial is technically once you complete your first trial. That means the game is in a situation where it believes it is still explaining to you the core gameplay aspects throughout the entire game until you reach the first ever trial that you complete. With the Gumjuice and the Yungoos, we all know the one. That means this is, by far, the longest tutorial in the entirety of Pokemon. Now, I will argue that it does a good enough job at explaining to you each and every little thing, but after a while it starts repeating things to make sure I guess really drills home what you're supposed to be doing, but it ultimately creates this environment where you're just sort of mashing A through the sequences because you've kind of figured it out by now. So the game actually takes so long to explain itself that either you figured it out on your own or you're just screw it, we ball, doing the best you can with what you know until you get to the end of the alleged tutorial. So, 5 out of 10 I think is fair, because honestly I'm more so confused. I don't think it's bad, so to speak. I just think that there's definitely got to be a more efficient way besides a 3-hour tutorial that slowly gives you information as you go. On to the next category. The rival. How, and well, I guess you could throw Gladian in there as well, are arguably how is the beginning of that archetype that most people typically find to hate in the newer generations of Pokemon, the goody two-shoes archetype, the rival that gives you all the revives and this and that and really babies you through your journey. How are you supposed to get better? And I want all of that to stop. Your rival in life doesn't just have to sit there and kick you down every single time and be the whole reason you hate existing. How is an integral part to the story and is a constant reminder of your end goal of being the grand champion in the new champion league that we have added to the Sun and Moon region of Alola. And he is a consistent part of the entire story. He has a development. He starts out hyper excited and then slowly starts to lock in on his battling scheme, and he's there every step of the way. Now, yes, he does give you probably way too many friendly items. And yes, he does offer you the ability to start healing before he battles you. He doesn't catch you off guard. But again, a rival doesn't exactly have to be a negative in your life. Your biggest hater doesn't have to be your rival. Your rival can just be your friend as you casually are trying to get through this life experience and be the better for it and become champion one way or the other, which I think is a good archetype for a character. Now, because Gladian is technically considered a rival, he kind of plummets this score down a bit, leaving it at an 8 out of 10. And allow me to explain this. Gladian is a poorly written character, but not because of the story reasons. He's poorly written as a rival, so I actually find it a little ridiculous that every source I checked labeled him as one. I always considered him kind of just like a random antagonistic individual, not really a rival, but sadly he is considered a rival, so due to this, I'm going to have to drop the rival score to an 8 out of 10. However, How is 100% carrying this, and I think the Goody Two-Shoes archetype can very easily be considered a rival. Your friends can be your rivals. Alright, on to the next category. The story. Kicking it off right out of the gates, you are immediately on a random Alolan Oasis Paradise. You were originally Cantonian, or I believe it was Univin. I might have to Google that. I'll probably put a little editor's note here. And then you were immediately taken off into your journey. And finally, again, many people might shoot you dead in the streets for liking something a little different, things known as change, but you're no longer doing gym battles. And honestly, after 6 generations of just doing gym battles over and over again, I was quite excited to see this new gameplay loop and new feature of the totems and the kahunas, which are still kind of gym battles, and the new way that the game tries to handle this whole Z-move mechanic and the overarching story of what's going on. And better more for it, I think that the story is more engaging because the new style allows you to have a completely different journey that's unavailable in any of the other Pokemon games. Again, I'm not allowed to use futures to help with the rankings, but the future games don't do anything like this either. And with that, every single person's biggest complaint about this is that it's not like the original games. Well, I hate to break this to you, but it's not the original games. And we need to get over this ideology that the Pokemon games have to be exactly like the Gen 1 games we played when we were, 10, like 20 years ago. We've been in 20 years of Pokemon and we're still complaining about the small aspects of the fact that the game isn't exactly like the games we played as a kid. Well, I'm glad they're not like the games we played as a kid because it allows us to have these interesting experiences like Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Now, I will kind of break the glass here. Some of these totem battles are ridiculously unfair. More so in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon than in Sun and Moon, but allow me to introduce you to Kecleon Sunny Day Lurantis Solar Blade. This battle alone broke me, which is, something I'll complain about in the battle section, but as the story develops and these totem Pokemon become stronger and stronger and stronger, and it kind of feeds into the story about all the kahunas, I can appreciate that the kahunas and the island trials and the characters actually have their own relevance to being there, and they're a part of the main story and showcase you through the journey of battling these totem Pokemon, rather than just being randomly thrown in characters that you see at the end of the corridor in the middle of a gym. When you go and do the Lush Island trial, Mallow is there with you, helping you do the ingredient gathering, or vice versa, the berry mashing, and etc., and so forth and so on. And then later on, as the story develops, these characters then show back up again as if it's black and white all over again. The gym leaders, or the island kahunas, are actually a part of the main overarching story, which I can greatly appreciate because it shows shades of, say, black and white Pokemon, where every single character has a reason for being there. That is awesome for the live stream of Pokemon, and I don't understand why this game is hated on so much for trying to be different. Every single character has an actual major plot point and reason for existing outside of just being somebody you're supposed to beat in a Pokemon battle. That is good storytelling. There are not a single character introduced to that's just some random nobody. Even the grunts have their own individual personality. Team Skull, the knuckleheads they are, have some of the funniest dialogue in the entirety of Pokemon. I'm only just now getting to Team Skull. The Professor and Guzma have their own little story arc, where Guzma is just a misbegotten teen who wants to be strong but was never given a chance in life. And of course, Kukui, being the perfect godsend that he is, does everything just right, and that all works out for him. And even to better more, that whole story in itself is just as interesting as the main story of the game. The story of this game is shockingly good, despite all of the negativity I typically see online. The only major issue that I typically find with the story of this game is the Aether Foundation as a whole. Weirdly enough, the gym leaders and the island kahunas and everything else do such a great job at pushing the game up to greater heights, only for the Aether Paradise to kind of drag it back down. Another thing of note is that the dialogue in this game likes to do what I like to call the new age conversation style. That when a TV show nowadays has one character say something, another person confirm that that's what that person said, and a third person who is confused re-ask what that person said. It's like, Hal will come in and be like, whoa, was that the Team Skull grunt? And then Gladding will be like, obviously that was the Team Skull grunt, you idiot. And then Lily will be like, oh my god, the Team Skull grunt, what are we gonna do? And then I'm sitting there wanting to commit vehicular manslaughter. So if that simply wasn't in this, the story would be a massive 10 out of 10. But sadly, with all of the dialogue looping itself and being somewhat irrelevant, I'm going to drop it down to an 8 out of 10. Mind you, if you do take the time to truly sit here and read every ounce this story has, this story is peak. One of the better stories in Pokemon. I could argue second to, say, Black and White, if you were to put me in a debate room and I had to talk to myself through it. Obviously, I can't do that. I've only got the thoughts in my head. So that's where I'm going to leave it. A crisp 8 out of 10. If you disagree, play the games again first. I recommend Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon just so you can really get that extra bit of toughness in the story. But both of them are effectively the same. But yeah. If you disagree with that, genuinely go back and replay these games. I think they could be considered amongst one of the better stories in the game. Now, obviously this game doesn't hold much merit, and I do think that certain aspects of it, fall flatter later on, but I'll get to those categories when I get them. I would genuinely recommend this game off the story alone, though, to most people, and I think it deserves a lot more credit for what it did, and I don't think it deserves a lot of the hate because of the way the gyms were handled. So, with that, I'll be moving away from the story and on to the next category. I kind of got into a little bit of a ramble session there, so hopefully this is usable. The graphics. Enjoy them while they last, because this is the last 3DS Pokemon game. And with it, I can finally stop my Socrates spiel and truly say that I believe the graphics of this game are a 10 out of 10. The sprites for the characters and the models and all that such actually hold up pretty true. A lot of people always argue that they don't like that the generic Player 1 character never showcases any emotion, which you could argue could drop it a point or two in the graphics quality because of that, but I don't think that my character alone not being shocked by everything that happens to him and having his individualistic expressions, that word is hard, really should cripple a game's ability to showcase feeling and emotion through the rest of the characters. Every single character is constantly reacting to everything that's going on. I think it's a very, like, estranged nitpick to be specifically off the charts when it comes to, like, this specific thing. So I will give this game a direct 10 out of 10. All of the gameplay looks amazing. I genuinely was kind of awestruck and had to look up when this game came out, because it was actually shocking that the game looked as good as it did. So, this is what I will be basing the future games off of when it comes to the 3D standard. Because if you're able to do this on a 3DS, the Switch should obviously be able to do better, right? Scarlet Violet, we'll get to that game though, don't worry. But yeah, moving on to the next category. The grind. Now, I don't think the grind in this game is arguably difficult or, like, annoying, but you do have to do it quite often because it's a bit strange, but you typically run into these random totem battles that are just a lot more difficult than they seem on the surface. Like, right off the scratch of it, you just typically think, like, oh, it's a Lurantis, let me throw a flying type out there, and then it hits you with Solar Blade powered by the sun. So, you know, kind of catches you a bit off guard. A few of the battles, either you have the right type for, or it creates a situation where you have to go get a good type for it and then strap a Z move on it. I'll get to that when I get to the battles category. And then, yeah, it's a little annoying. Certain things require you to grind if you don't have your Pokemon up to the correct level. And there was even one of them, which the Lurantis one specifically, where I kind of had to overlevel my Trumbeak at the time and get a Toucannon just to genuinely feel like I stand a chance. I'll explain why the battles are kind of annoying when I get there. But yeah, I think this grind gets a 7 out of 10. Nothing super crazy to really go on about. Once I get to battles, you'll see why the grind got a 7 out of 10. Because again, it's not like I had to grind like crazy. It's just the reasoning behind having to grind was a little ridiculous. And any game that makes me feel like I have to overlevel my Pokemon is again, absurdity, not difficulty. So the fact that I had to grind is a little ridiculous. On to the next category. Oh, great heavens above, Arceus himself. The battles. The battles in these games are the most randomly difficult battles in the entirety of Pokemon. Not consistently difficult, randomly difficult. They just catch you off guard out of nowhere when you're not paying attention and hit you with the most Looney Tunes battle you've ever seen in your life. I've already mentioned Kecleon and Lurantis a handful of times, but even say the Vikavolt or the Araquanid or the Wishy-Washy can also give you just as much random trouble. And I am actually pretty enticed to the difficulty of this. However, it's a bit awkward to give it such a high difficulty rating because the biggest difficulty about it is the fact that you are being jumped. I can't argue difficulty when they're able to do something that I am not. If I was able to throw out 2 Pokemon and it was still just as challenging, I could see an argument for it being difficulty, but it starts leveling on absurdity, which I've already said I don't strongly like about Pokemon games. So, with that being said, I could argue that if they couldn't just summon a Kecleon to Sunny Day, that Lurantis dies before it even gets a Solar Blade off. So, with that in mind, the Z moves are the second most balanced mechanic. I do think that having a super overpowered move one time is not incredibly unbalanced compared to, say, like, Dynamaxing, which doesn't exist yet, so I can't use it. But compared to Mega Evolution, I feel like it is quite balanced in its own right. Plus, you need to be holding an item to use it, so it takes away the ability of using, say, another item, which could arguably be better, like, say, a Choice Card for something for speed. You know, it doesn't matter if you have a super powerful move if you're just not fast enough to get it off. So, I think the battles category for this one is another 7 out of 10. This game seems to be doing, like, slightly above average on the scoring cards, which is, you know, I guess fair enough. It's doing its best that it can. But yeah, I think a 7 out of 10 is fair for the battle aspects. I do think that the new mechanics with the Z moves is intriguing, and it made competitive pretty fun for the time it was around. So, you know what? Yeah, 7 out of 10, on to the next category. The music. It's Hawaiian, it's cool, it's vibey, it fits the theme. I can sit here in every single category, give you a 20-minute spiel about music, and I feel like I've done this exact same bit every single time, and honestly, I should probably just bundle up all of the music categories in one go. So let's not waste your time. 10 out of 10, no failures in this entire playlist. On to the next category. Now it's time for the gyms. Well, there's not really any gyms, so this category is a little scuffed. Obviously, the next best thing would be the kahunas specifically, I guess. But you know what? I'll include the totem environments as well. And you know, it's like a few of the trials, like the grass trial with Mallow, or like the fire or water trial, or like pretty cool in their own right. Sometimes you randomly get the electric trial where you just walk into a building, go into like, the janitor's closet, and then line up a bunch of charger bugs in the shape of a Z. It's, I don't know, it's kind of a weird one to grade. So I'm just going to go with the old reliable grading scale of basing them off of how well you can tell what type you're going to be facing against when you get in there, which will easily wind this game up with an 8 out of 10. For the most part, they all hit. Battling on a volcano is actually quite cool and interesting, and I do like the fact that every single one of them aren't just limited to being, seat belted into a building of some sorts. Being able to be in the middle of the woods is cool. The ponds, the lakes, all that crazy stuff. I think all of that in its own right is interesting, to say the least. I don't like, though, that all of the kahuna battles are just fought on a square in the middle of a dirt pavement. It's like, I guess, not everything has to be all slice of lifey, and there's probably some Hawaiian reasoning behind it. But yeah, for the most part, I think that could have been more done there. So 8 out of 10 is probably more generous than this game deserves, but I'm going to leave it at that and move on to the next category. The Pokemon selection. So fun fact, Pokemon Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon actually added the least amount of Pokemon across all the Pokemon generations, even the newer future ones, which is 81 Pokemon. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon added 88, not 88 new ones on top of the 81, just 7 extra Pokemon for the new variation of the game. With that being said, every single design in this game outside of the starters are a banger. I mean, this game literally proved that them making Pikachu clones was bad, because Mimikyu was an absolute certified Rotten Tomato fresh. Drampa's a banger. I can't think of a single Pokemon from this generation that flops, and that's surprising because I am the world's biggest hater. The list of Pokemon that are in this game that are good, all of them. The ones that are bad, none of them. Genuinely, I couldn't find a single bad one. Some tried to argue my friend Pyukamuku. That little guy is the GOAT. I mean, his design isn't as super complicated, but that's because the creature he's trying to be isn't. Every single design in this game's generation is actually peak, and I'm going to give this game an explicit 10 out of 10. All the way to the top of the charts. An insanely good dex that, I can't argue against. If your favorite Pokemon comes from here, you've got some solid taste. I can give you that much. On to the next category. My overall feelings of the game. Now, I feel like Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon are in that weird little crossroads where they're just simply hated for being new. And in the grand scheme of things, these games deserved a lot more love than they got. And it's a real shame that the Pokemon community started straying away from this style of games in the future, because this was truly the last coup de grace of the 3DS era. And for it to be as disliked as it was honestly shocking to me as a kid, because even as a kid, I remember quite enjoying this game, and having replayed through Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, and Ultra Moon, I also really enjoyed the game. Now, I do agree it does focus a little too much on the story, which sounds ridiculous to say, but it does. But I feel like that helps create a different experience than what you would typically have in the Pokemon world. So, with that being said, if you haven't played this game before, or recently haven't played it, I would genuinely say to pick Sun Up, or pick Ultra Sun Up, and just casually play through the games and genuinely read. I find that you'll find it quite surprising how good the games are in the grand scheme of things, and to hope that they continue to be better throughout, the next few generations I have to go. So with that, I'm going to go boot up Generation 8 Sword and Shield on the Switch, and see how that goes for me. I'll kick it over to the dance scene and get the overall scores for this game up here right away. Generation 8. Sword and Shield Pokemon. We are finally on the Switch variations of the games, so I'm going to kick it off with the starters. We have Scorbunny, Sobble, and Grookey. And to that resolve, if you ask any single person in the Pokemon community what their favorite starter-type Pokemon are, I guarantee you that a single one from this generation makes the list. Rillaboom has a whole meme culture behind it, which I can kind of understand the Oonga Boonga Monkey types of dealio with the thought process. However, it's just Semi-Sage on steroids, and to that degree, it is a horrific design. If it didn't have any competitive viability, I guarantee you this Pokemon would have gotten tossed aside as badly as Chestnut did, but this Pokemon Pokemon actually deserves the hate. It's just uninspired garbage. Inteleon, who was going for more of the James Bond style, with that old resolve, just fails because he ends up looking like a pencil that was just not sharpened quite right. At least Grookey and Sobble kind of fit that cute aspect, but then we have the Fire-type Pokemon, Cristiano Ronaldo, Sui, or Sue! For my Portuguese audience that I assume I might not have, shout out InkNightZero randomly. But besides the point of that, it's completely ridiculous that every single Fire-type Pokemon is literally just rabbit, rabbit, bigger rabbit, but Cristiano Ronaldo. It's something that the Starter-type Pokemon just consistently fall flat on, especially in this generation. So, to not spend too long on this, I'm just going to give it a 2 out of 10. The baby forms of all of these Pokemon really carry this list, but even to that extent, they can only do so much. So yeah, I'm going to be moving on to the next category now. The tutorial. This is another game in the series where they give you a very quick battle, just kind of toss you in, and then they quickly explain the catching mechanics, and then you're cut loose into the fury of wild Pokemon with no actual proper explanation to what's going on. Which is kind of absurd given that the whole Dynamax situation and such is barely explained to you at all, and I'll get onto the nepotism aspects of why Sword and Shield does so poorly in the story aspect, but for now, when it comes to the tutorial, this tutorial gets a 2 out of 10. At least you know the battling and a little bit about how the items and such work, and maybe the Pokemon Center if you were super paying attention, but there is barely an attempt at a tutorial, if a tutorial at all. Next category. I'm whipping out the paper for this one, so you know it's going to be good. The rival. Do you remember every single thing I said about how being nice isn't a bad trait in a rival? Alright, now throw all of that out of the window. Hop is an absolute idiot, a certified buffoon, and completely useless. His entire existence reminds me of Barry if he was poorly written. I think I'd actually take 7 berries over this, and mind you, I like Barry. But Arceus, this is insane. All Hop does every step of the way is remind you he's the brother to the champion, and through sheer nepotism, he's allegedly your rival. The average 8-year-old should have zero problem obliterating his team as it was designed by Nintendo devs on battery acid again, and there's not one redeeming quality or growth of this character throughout the entire story. You could delete him from the entire game and nothing would change. 0 out of 10 rival, actually abysmal. Stop giving me max revives, I already have 20 and this is a Nuzlocke. I'm referencing something there, don't worry about it. Insert dump of information I already know simulator of a character. Bidet is also listed as a rival, however he didn't really feel like one. There's not much on his character besides the fact that he's purposefully unlikable and then randomly tries to have the I'm redeeming myself arc, but by the time that happens you've either already forgotten he existed, or you just don't care as there's no reason to invest yourself in whatever he is doing. 0 out of 10. Throw this rival into the trash. Next category. The story. Now, are you ready for the most unimaginative story to ever breach the realms of a Pokemon community? So bad that it makes me actually wish I was playing Diamond and Pearl and Platinum instead? Are you ready for a twist villain so obvious that it might as well have been thrown at you like a brick through a childhood window of a 1983 storefront? Well, if that's the case, then this is the game for you. If not, avoid this game like the plague. You get into the league through sheer nepotism. You coincidentally know the brother of the champion, didn't know if you knew that or not, which is a constantly brought up plot point, by the way, who then gives you an invitation to be able to fight in the league. You are not able to do the league participation if you are not vouched in by someone else who is a part of the league. This is shown as the given truth by Bidet. They can randomly decide, even after giving it to you, to take it away from you so you can no longer partake in the gym challenges anymore. That is ridiculous. Nepotism is the entire showcasing of this game's story. It's absolutely ridiculous. The only reason why you're able to become the champion is because Leon, who is the older brother to the kid you know, it gives you the vouch to become the champion. Outside of that, and the whole Dynamax situation, which is barely even a story aspect, you have a handful of cutscenes which give you some general exposition, but you don't do anything. Leon does everything in the game. You constantly keep getting told, oh, don't worry about it. Just go do your challenges or whatever. And then you get through all of the gyms, the 8th gym, and Leon is taking care of everything and whatever. Of course, around the 8th gym, you're finally told about how, Rose is the bad guy, and you have that weird section where you have to battle all the guys and get the key to go up the tower, and then you get activation. But then, no. Just go get your 8th gym badge, screw off, youngin', whatever. You get your 8th gym badge, you're finally in the arena, you're beating up on all those trainers you like. You blow Hop's brains out right off the bat. For some reason, you're battling Marnie, and then you're like, oh, okay, so now it's time to fight Leon. I guess the game is over. Nope, you have to battle all the gym leaders. Well, not all of them, just like 3 random pick gym leaders again, but okay, all right. Whatever, re-battle the gym leaders. That's kind of interesting. Cool. I guess now I get to fight Leon, right? All right, Leon, run the ones. You're cooked. Great heavens. Chair Rose, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, big twist billing guy. Your final battle? Go screw yourself. Now you have to spend 3 hours randomly battling a handful of things before you then fight Eternatus in a kind of an interesting cutscene, I guess. Then you beat him. Throw whatever ball you want at him. He's a guaranteed capture. By the way, this is another game where you can't catch the box art legendary in the main game. You have to go get them in the post game, but at least they show up for the final fight to help you in a Dynamax battle, for Christ's sake. But then, finally, you get back through. You're ready to fight Leon. You fight Leon. Surprisingly, his team is pretty well built, and then the game is over. That's that. Oh, wait. No, you don't get to fight Leon. Because Bidet shows up, and you randomly have to battle him for whatever reason, and then you get to fight Leon. Jesus, this game just Arceus. This game just couldn't end. Alright, I'm going for a whole different pantheon of religion here, because that's how absurd this game's story is. They do nothing the whole game. Then you have a random 3-hour segment. So remember all the things I hated about Diamond Pearl Platinum? This game personifies all of that distaste. It's absolutely ridiculous that something like this slipped through the cracks of the quality of Pokemon that we're typically used to. So, with that being said, I'm going to move on to the next category. However, this game gets a 0 out of 10 on the story. It might as well not exist. On to the next. The graphics. Now, I disagree with the masses on this one. This is probably one of the only things that this game does quite well. I'm just going to go ahead and immediately slap an 8 out of 10 on this before I go into the explanations. This game was rushed, and I can agree with that to a certain extent, but willing to put a gun to a Nintendo dev's head over the fact that a tree doesn't look the right way, we all knew I was going to complain about this, is absolutely ridiculous. Boo-hoo, a tree doesn't look to your optimized standards. My immersion! I do agree that your immersion is very important, and it's the small details that matter. But, this game was rushed for a console that had just came out so that they could get the proprietary release. I'm willing to give them a little bit of leniency, as the rest of the game, or the giant collective of the game, looks great for it being on the Switch. At least better than Scarlet and Violet, which I'm not allowed to use, but of course, which I'm not allowed to use, but I'm going to at least bring up that fact because I feel like it's a fair notion to talk about. This game's graphics are perfectly fine, 8 out of 10. Moving on to the next category. The grind. Now, with EXP share forcibly turned on and you being able to do nothing about that, I'm now on the side of EXP share bad. Okay, which I think this is the main game that kind of broke people when it came to the EXP share. All of my Pokemon inevitably reached an apex point where they were ridiculously overleveled, and my only option to stop them from doing so was to actively avoid trainer battles, which I really didn't want to do, or put Pokemon in the box so that they wouldn't get to an overleveled point and then be effectively, too overleveled to where the game was a baby mode game anyways. But it's not like there were any, major impactful fights that I just weren't able to, or that I wasn't able to get through, vice versa, with overleveled or underleveled Pokemon. The Pokemon battles in this game, which I'll get to in a moment, are kind of just underwhelming for the most part. So the grind for this game gets a 4 out of 10, because despite the fact that there wasn't really much grind, I wasn't able to do any grind, which I feel like there should still be a little bit of grind in Pokemon. It's ridiculous that the EXP share is locked on. 4 out of 10, moving on. The battles. I want to start this off with the only positive. The fact that Dynamax is a thing makes battles slightly interesting. However, it basically dumbs the battle to the first person to Dynamax loses half the time. Or if you're battling against random trainers, you just Dynamax first, wipe their Pokemon off the face of the earth, and there's nothing that they can do about it, right? The gym trainers, of course, in the massive Coliseum or whatever, the gym leaders, you just click the Dynamax and murder their first 3 Pokemon, you're good. Even if they Dynamax your last Pokemon, just cheat and use items, who cares? That's it. Now, the main complaint about this game is that with the way the grind is and how your Pokemon typically just end up over-leveling everything, the battles in this game, even if they were designed well, which really only Leon's battle is, fall flat on every single aspect because you're consistently going to be too over-leveled to do anything. I made an active effort to try to stay under-leveled, and even I couldn't do it because there were just so many things in this game that throw XP at your face, and there's not really much you can do about it except try to just proactively avoid it. So sadly, the battles for this game get a 3 out of 10. Also, the finale stuff for this game really ruins it a lot. The random gauntlet against trainers that you met throughout your entire journey, and then the whole like Marnie and Bidet and the hop thing and all that stuff, absolutely horrifically done, and I hope they never do this again in Pokemon. So take your 3 out of 10 and on to the next category. The music! I mean, it's frickin' Pokemon! 10 out of 10! Ring ding 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 ding. Not a single L. Unironically, the music in this game is amongst some of my favorites. So yeah, super 10 out of 10 there for personal bias. But yeah, moving on to the next category because I feel like I should just remove the music category altogether. A ring a ding ding. The gyms, if you can even call them a gym for the most part, which I'm going to call them for simplicity. The puzzles leading up to the gyms are actually quite enjoyable, and you know exactly what type you're walking into every single time you enter one of these gyms. Almost every single one of them, at least for the most part. And I actually quite enjoy the massive coliseums, even though they're all basically the exact same finale coliseum. The chants, the atmosphere, the music, all of that coming together creates such an interesting experience, which is arguably probably one of the better parts of this game. It's a real shame it doesn't last longer because you usually end up just obliterating all of the enemy gym trainers' Pokemon. But I digress. The gym's atmospheres and the gyms altogether are really great, so I'm going to give them a firm 9 out of 10 and then quickly move on to the next category of this game. The Pokemon selection. Outside of Corviknight, Hatterene, Grimmsnarl, Dragapult, and one other Pokemon that I'm immediately forgetting after reading the sheet of paper, I guarantee you most other Pokemon in this deck have immediately slipped your mind. Even the legendaries of Zacian and Zamazenta are only relevant in the competitive scene. Outside of that, their Pokemon designs are kind of just generic Houndoom diffs every day of the week, but that's besides the point. I feel like this is kind of just Game Freak running out of ideas, and with how rushed this game felt altogether, they kind of just quickly threw everything at the wall that they possibly could have, and it amounted to like some okay designs, some good designs, and a lot of mediocre to bad designs. So I'm going to stamp this game with a crisp 5 out of 10. I don't really feel like I'm going to get anything productive done going through each independent Pokemon and why they specifically failed to meet a certain quota that I'm basing this off of. I'm just going to jump over to the next category and kind of just let that 5 out of 10 sit. If you don't agree with that, go look at the decks. It's genuinely actually just mediocre, right down the middle. Moving on. My overall feelings for this game. All in all, this game felt like one small step for Pokemon and then one giant leap off a cliff. Every single thing about this game felt like it's just Pokemon, I guess, I don't know, running out of ideas? I don't know how exactly to explain this in a wider scale than that. It feels like on every single turn, they kind of just shot themselves in the foot because they didn't know where exactly to take certain things. And I ultimately believe that that's because this game was kind of rushed out to meet a deadline so that it could come out for the Switch when it originally dropped. And it ultimately dropped the quality to such a low degree that people often look back at this game and remember it so poorly. And those people are right. Looking back on this game, it is done so poorly. The story is barely even a thing to begin with. Every single character finds themselves being irrelevant or annoying, and for the most part, this game falls very flat at meeting any expectations of what a Pokemon game is supposed to be. Every single core aspect of this game is atrocious. Dynamax is a cool thing altogether, but as per usual, it's just another broken mechanic added for the sake of trying to shake up the battle mechanics, which have been the same since Generation 1. So, as long as they keep adding these and then removing them in the next generation, it'll become immediately irrelevant. So by the time we get to the next generation, we'll be completely tossed it aside for whatever new gimmick the game decides to put on us. So, with that being said, I'm going to toss the overall score up, but real quick, I'm going to discuss Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Terrible game. If you hate these games, you hate Gen 4 altogether, and you're correct in doing so. Anyways, now to toss up the scores for Generation 8 of Pokemon, Sword and Shield, do my little jig, and then we should be segueing into the final generation of Pokemon for this video. Generation 9 Pokemon. Scarlet and Violet. We have finally reached the last main series, mainstream game of the Pokemon franchise prior to LegendsZA coming out in the following few days. Again, hopefully I get this video out on time. So, for the last time in this entire video, allow me to say it once more. Let's get this section started off with the starters. Now, Quaxly, Fuecoco Puff, and Sprigatito are possibly some of the best baby Pokemon of the beginning trio of starter Pokemon throughout the entire generation. If you have any beef with these guys, then it is a personal problem you can have between me, because their designs are absolutely peak. Now, it's the later stages of the water line that really does drag down the name of the rest of the starters, because Quaxly evolves into Quackavall as its final section, which makes absolutely no sense in the progression of the Pompadour bird. I wanted Elvis bird, okay? This may be personal bias, but how does a dude with a Pompadour evolve into some freakazoid middle evolution, and then its final evolution is Carnival? Are we in Brazil? That doesn't make any actual sense across the entirety of it, given that the game is based in Spain to begin with. But I digress. At least Meowscarada, Florgatito, Skeledirge, and Crocolore, carry up their name. Maybe Crocolore's kind of iffy here or there, but for the most part, they're at least enjoyable for the starter section. It's just, the water line is as disappointing as the Poplio line back in the day, where it's really just an absolute disgrace to the starter trio. So, with that, I will be giving the starters a firm 7 out of 10, and moving on to the next category. The tutorial. It's not 9 hours long, which is great. It's actually surprisingly one of the greatest things about this game. It's not incredibly invasive, it passively teaches you everything, and you do learn Terrace right near the ending of the tutorial as it cleans up. You get the Pokédex and the school, and all of that stuff is explained to you. There's even a trainer school, literally a school, as the main portion of the story, so at any given point in time if you're lost, you could just go and learn things. And then there's legitimate Pokemon quizzes in there, which is kind of cool, but that has nothing to do with the tutorial. I'll get to why I like that cool aspect later. But as of right now, I do think that the tutorial of this game is really solid. There's not really much left up to chance that you might possibly not know it. You know all the new game features, you know everything that's going on. 9 out of 10 tutorial. I do think it could be done a little bit faster, but of course I'm not going to complain about a tutorial that is shorter than 3 hours, because Sun and Moon broke me. On to the next category. For, probably, most likely, the very last time of this video, I am once again pulling out of this sheet of paper. However, to avert expectation, I am pulling out the sheet of paper for a good thing in a Pokemon game, because I want to make sure that I get this completely right. So, for the last time pulling the paper out, hopefully this video, the rival. This game lists Nemona, Arven, and Penny as rivals. However, unlike Gladion, I will not be agreeing with this game. Nemona is your only rival. Penny is barely a part of your actual progress in the game in a rival sense, and calling Arven of all people your rival is ridiculous. Friends, definitely. Rival, you're joking. Now let's dive into Nemona and what makes her somehow a really awesome rival and a terrible one at the same time. The illusion of choice. Nintendo, please for the love of God, stop adding text options that basically don't matter. It's Nugget Bridge all over again, where a yes or a no still leads to a battle in disbelief. Just give me one option if you're so inclined to make me pick something, or better yet, don't make me pick it all, and instead just have dialogue pop up for me like any other character. Outside of that yap session, let me explain why that's relevant. Nemona at every step of the way simply doesn't take no for an answer when it comes to her story and road of becoming a champion trader. And yet at every single turn, she's bringing it up and asking you about it. At what point is Game Freak gonna take the hint that even a 10-year-old kid doesn't need to be reminded of their goals this much? Outside of that negative, she has quite a lot of positives. Her team is actually well designed and strongly built. She is pushing to achieve one of your main goals as a trainer, and is with you every single step of the way as your rival. She doesn't really develop much as a character, she's kind of just her, and that's that. But she doesn't really need an overarching story to be a relevant and interesting rival. I think for what she is, she's appreciated because at least she's not hot. Can I get an amen? 9 out of 10 rival. If she was more integrated in the entire game, she could easily break the 10 out of 10 book wide open. I just needed it to be absolutely clear that albeit the strong negatives of her, it yet again proves your rival does not have to be an absolute chingling to be a rival. They can be a good person too. So, with that being said, 9 out of 10, posted on the board, on to the next category. Now it is time for the story. This one is going to be a bit of a yap session, and it's actually taken me quite a lot of time to put this to memory and not read it off a piece of paper, so I'm going to lock in, and hopefully this goes well. So, the story. There are 3 different types of stories in this game, all of which are actually quite well fleshed out. You have the Champion's Road, the Titan's Road, and the Team Star basis. Now, each individual one can be completed at your own pace, however, you do have to complete all 3 of them to get to the main final ending of the story, which is in Area 0. So, I'll get to that part when we get it. However, let's start things off with the Champion Road. As I discussed with Nimona, this is of course your main goal as a Pokemon trainer, to complete the Elite Four and go through all the showcasings. This is actually one of the weaker stories of the 3, and besides Nimona just being her cheery self and enjoying her presence, there's not really much substance in the generosity of it all. The puzzles are sure fine, but the game itself is kind of a bit unpleasurable to look at times. I'll get to graphics in a moment. So, as you're blitzing through the Champion Road section of the games, outside of the gyms and the gym trainers you're battled throughout it, everybody loves Larry, when you enter most of the gyms in this game, you don't actually know what type you're actually facing. Like, Larry's literally in a restaurant. But then on the other end of it, you do have some, like the water gym or the bug gym, where they do make sense. So it's kind of, yet again, one of those 50-50 curveballs on whether or not one of them is good or not. However, one of my major complaints is that the gym leaders don't actually have any main push in the story. However, the Elite Four and the Champion are a constant brought up character slot throughout the entire game. You are running into them at every single step and turn and way throughout the entire game, and they make a consistent impact on you, the player, and they are constantly pushing you towards your goal of becoming the champion in the Champion's Road thing, leaving this story to be one of the better stories in all of Pokemon, because almost every single character you run into has a major point and plot point to play, and throughout all of this, Director Clavel is consistently reaching out to you and trying to figure out and make sure you are doing your own part to becoming a champion. So with that, I'm going to segue into the second story. I'm going to switch into the Team Star bases, as I wish to save the Titan one for last, because I believe it to be one of the best stories in this game. The Team Starbase story begins with you receiving a call in the lunchroom, which Director Clavel then comes in, wondering who you're talking to. Wink, wink. This will be important later. Then, you are told by a person who says their name is Cassiopeia that you need to go and defeat these Team Star individuals. Now, the reason they summoned you for the task is because they saw you beat them outside on the staircase prior. I forgot to mention that part, but I'm bringing it up now. That she believes that you are capable of defeating the 5 Team Star bosses and defeating the group for good. Now, the reason why this works is something that is explained later, but in their secret team code, if one of them loses a battle as the boss, they have to step down and ditch the team and possibly try going back to school, which is something that was written in their code so that they would always stick together and do their best to stay as a group, which is now going to be used against them. As you clear through each Team Star base and you destroy and move out of the way every single boss, you slowly get more and more exposition, which showcases that these Team Star bullies, as what they originally were known as, were actually the ones getting bullied, and they decided to take matters into their own hands and bring an M16 to school. And by that I mean a weaponized vehicle with a Reveroom strapped into it that can deal a monstrous amount of damage and has a health bar that's way too big. Now, during these segments, every single battle is actually quite difficult. I would try to level into the difficulty of absurd, but at least it is only one Pokemon, and as long as you have a Pokemon with a correct type matchup, you should be solid. A little bit of setup moves here and there never hurt anybody, and I would be terrified of this game if I was doing a Nuzlocke in it. I want that to be said. But outside of that, once you beat all the Team Star bosses, you finally get this big breakdown of the overarching story that, yeah, these are just a bunch of misunderstood kids that were bullied for the ways that they were. You know, the pretty girl bullied by everybody else, and the nerdy, dorky kids, and this and that, yada, yada, yada. And they are, albeit in the wrong, they're not the first ones to fire. They just decided to respond back in an extreme way. So, Director Clavel, who was pretending to be some dude named Clive or whatever, his character is kind of mildly important. He just shows up and, you know, is a whole thing. Then pretends to be Cassiopeia at the very ending of the story branch and meets you at the main gate, where he challenges you to a mildly difficult battle depending on what starter you pick. If he has the Meowscarada because you picked Quaxley, you might be screwed, but that'll be relevant later. He pretends to be Cassiopeia to try to take the fall for Penny, who is a character you met at the very beginning of the game, who is the supply person that constantly brings you things, who is actually Cassiopeia. And I'm going to be honest, her character is my least favorite thing about this entire game. Now, Penny is actually one of my least favorite characters in the entire story. She's one of those types of victimhood archetypes. It's like, it's all my fault that I need to be punished. Don't hurt my friends. You know, the real, like, e-girl type archetype that makes you just want to, hate every inch of this earth that we live on. Of course, I'm being extremely toxic, but if you were to just completely remove her from the game, this would arguably be in my top 5, and that's not even, like, a debate on that. It's genuinely got a solid story to it. But yeah, outside of her as a character, you then go in and you battle her for your final battle against Penny, aka Cassiopeia, where you then wipe the floor with her because all she does is throw out 6 evolutions that all just spam baby doll eyes, and then you just kind of quack a ball, kick them, and then it's over. But that's besides the point. Boom, Team Star base is over with. Director Clavel then comes in as they're breaking up their little crew, but instead he actually offers them the ability to come back together and train Pokemon in the Team Star base, and they can stay together as a team because he has realized over the course of the story that, yeah, these kids are not exactly in the wrong, nor are they in the right, so he forces them to do community service, which basically means that they get off scot-free because the community service is them doing what they were already doing. However, solid story. Genuinely worth the play. I had an enjoyable time. Now it's time for the depressing story. I'm going to go ahead and warn the people. If you've played this game before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't think this story is depressing or in any way heartwarming, you're a cold son of a gun. So, with that being said, let's get started on the Titan story. My favorite one. You meet Arven at a lighthouse, who is coincidentally trying to get in or out of it, doesn't particularly matter. However, you meet him whilst doing this Koraidon quest, and Koraidon brings you to the lighthouse with him. To which he says, oh, okay, he wants to deal with you now, and he tosses you along the Pokeball and screws off. You then run back into him at the school, and then outside of the school, he tells you that there are these Mista Herbica that he needs that can cure anything, and he wants to find them, right? You don't get any other exposition inside of that. It's just, boom, Titan base starts. You're thinking, okay, sure, random side quest, got it. Oh boy, are you wrong. As you slowly progress through each Titan and each story point throughout the entire journey, you reach different moments where Arven slowly showcases to you that he has a Pokemon that's known as a Mavishtiff that is deathly ill. It's blind, it can barely move, it doesn't bark or yip or really do anything, and these Herba Mystica sandwiches slowly recuperate this dog, and he gains his eyesight, and then he can slowly start moving. And Arven, who really only has this dog for him, for reasons I'll explain later, I'm not trying to spoil the story as I'm telling it, he becomes more and more and more in belief that this Herba Mystica actually works. And then, by the time you finally reach the final Titan and you get the final Herba Mystica, the dog dies. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, it's a Nintendo game, and the dog recovers fully, and it brings the joy of life back into Arven, and he really is happy and excited for what has happened here. And if that doesn't tug at your hamstrings, then you must have not have seen the Stoutland episode in Pokemon Black and White, because it genuinely actually kind of hit home a little. Dogs are a favorite of mine, and anything relating to dogs will get me, alright? Old Yeller, Where the Red Fern Grows, many old dog movies like that, they just kind of get you going a certain type of way, and then, obviously I'm not going to cry to them, but you get the point. Once you complete the Titan story and all of that stuff, you are then, Arven is then contacted by his mother and or father, which it depends on the type of game you've gotten, and more exposition is given that the professors are actually Arven's parents, who have basically been neglectful of him his entire life, which is why Mavishtiff is the only thing that he typically seems to care about. They then don't actually even really talk to him too much, and they say that they need him to bring me, or you, the player, to the research station to get this alleged Scarlet Book, which Arven then later on has, but they wait until we get into the research station to do so, which is in the lighthouse. After that, we are stated that we need about 3 people, we make 4, to go down into Area 0 and, help the professor with what they need us to do, which is why we were summoned in the first place. Now it's time for Area 0 start. Obviously, as we've completed all the campaigns, we have Nimona, we have Penny, and we have Arven and ourselves, and we are now going down into Area 0, where, in Area 0, you go through the 4 research stations, which slowly give you exposition on what happened down here. To summarize it, the original professor was killed in a Koraidon or a Miraidon accident, where a territorial dispute went to happen, and she jumped in between the Pokemon and ultimately perished and passed away. Now, Furthermore, when you finally reach the lab at the very beginning, or I mean the very end of Area Zero, and a bunch of wild Pokemon breach out of containment because you've just now opened the locks to Pandora's box, and you have to battle them off and fend your way off until you're finally able to enter, where the robotic Sarada or the guy, I forgot his name, are waiting for you to then finally dump the lore that you should have already attained by now, that they're dead and the robot just has a downloaded AI brain of theirs. You take the elevator up to the final teleportation time travel-y area, pardon me. You take the elevator up to the teleportation time travel-y thingy-madoohicker, and basically with that, you are then given the information that you need to beat the Professor Robot in a battle because it's going to trigger a defense mode when you try to shut down the time machine. And the time machine needs to be shut down because Paradox Pokemon are being slung out of it like crack fiends in a Macy's parking lot. So, with that, you put in the Scarlet Book, you go to shut down the lab, and all of a sudden, the battle commences. You beat the brakes off of them, bada bing, bada boom. Then, the robot realizes that the actual professor really didn't care about even her kids and only cared about this dumb time machine because a backup protocol is engaged, which then prompts the AI robot professor to realize that the only way to shut this down is to get rid of them because they're the true code and they need to go back in time. However, they're hijacked and it forces a battle with the Koraidon or the Miraidon, whichever one, for which game you have, except this battle is unlosable. It is effectively a cutscene that you are allowed to play. You are forced to terror to beat it. You just spam moves. You can't die. Your Koraidon will always hang on because it cares a lot and it's locking in. So, at final anticlimactic nonsense, of course it's kind of cool to win the battle, and then after you beat the professor, you were then launched into a kind of anticlimactic battle with the Koraidons, where you basically can't lose, so it's kind of like a type until you realize that the secret sauce is that, again, you can't lose. You beat out the battle, and then everything explodes. You get out of Area Zero, and then bada bing, bada boom. Now you go fight Nemona for the last time after becoming a champion, and that is the main story of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And if you can go through all of those stories, and if you can genuinely get through all of that story and find something small to hate about it and then decide that you hate the entire game, I genuinely think that you are just lying to yourself and don't want to accept the fact that these games actually have a pretty decent story, and they gave you 3 of them, and all 3 of them are pretty solid across the board. This game easily gets a 10 out of 10 in the story category, just on how much exposition there is alone. There's so much going on in this game, and they nail each individual bit of it. If you found something wrong with this story, I guarantee you either mashed through it or never even gave it a chance to begin with, because you're probably one of those people who just hate the newer Pokemon games just to hate them. I typically find a lot of the complaints of this game in the graphics, and I'll get to that when I can, but as far as I'm concerned with the story, this game nails it every single thing it needs to, right on the head. So, with all of that out of the way, the longest yab session of the video, I will now be jumping to the next category. Now, really quickly, I forgot to note before I go into the graphics, I'm not going to include the DLC story. It is good, but paying $30 on a Pokemon game is something that I morally cannot decide to discuss upon, because I think it is absolutely ridiculous to expect the Pokemon community to spend money on something that should have just been a part of the game if they wanted to add it, or as a random side story or something of another matter. I think it's ridiculous to put DLC in a Pokemon game, and I will die with this opinion. Pokemon should not become Call of Duty. Moving on to graphics now. Okay, the graphics of this game is probably one of the biggest and most fair arguments I typically see with most people that play this game. And I want to keep it at a constant that I also agree with that opinion. The fact that you can't have more than 5 Pokemon on your screen, or else it becomes 140p Pokemon, is why this game has so many negative reviews, and many aspects of this game is typically forgotten about. The graphics often cause people to become unimmersed in the game, and albeit the story is incredibly good, it's kind of hard to argue against that every single time you do anything cool, the game has to stutter and load and do every single thing else. How do you make a game that's only for one single console, unoptimized for the one console it's intended to be played on? How does this thing play better on a Steam Deck? What was even the thought process of this game being made? You genuinely, go ahead, do the Sunflora gym. You can't. It's such a laggy, buggy mess by the time you get the 7 Sunflora, and the game genuinely becomes a slog to play. So, at a constant rate, at least, the 3D models and stuff are, visually appealing. That's if you have only one of them on screen at a time. It's also really funny just watching things randomly render in, and the map itself is a massive joke. Stop doing open world games if you're not going to put anything in them. Things like this happens. The graphics weren't able to stay up to standard because the world was so massive, but there's nothing in the world. They put Rufflet in the desert, for Christ's sake, which makes absolutely no sense. The graphics for this game could have been solid had they have just downsized the map a little bit and tried to be more proactive with optimizing the game. Instead, they made a map super big like Elden Ring, and then you do nothing but go from boss to boss to boss to boss to boss. The average person is not exploring every nook and cranny of this map, and they just have to experience the poor quality. There are very few people that even 100% games alone, let alone the Pokemon games. No one cares about this big empty space. So the graphics get a 1 out of 10. I agree, they are terrible and absolutely unacceptable for the Pokemon universe. On to the next category. The grind. Basically, non-existent. Your Pokemon are too low leveled, just go to a raid den. Like, that's it. Get some candies, crank up your Pokemon. Your Pokemon are over-leveled, great, ignore every trainer. You have to talk to trainers in this game, which is kind of weird, but you can get used to it. 10 out of 10. Your Pokemon should never be under or over-leveled, and it's very easy to fix any issues between the two of those. So, I'm not going to waste any time. I already yapped a lot about the story, so on to the next category. The battles. Before I showcase the battles, I need to talk about one of the most broken battle mechanics ever added to Pokemon. The Terra typing. I think the Terra typing is one of the most unchained, unheaved Pokemon battle mechanic in the entirety of Pokemon. Oh, your Pokemon is already broken enough? Great, give it a third typing. It doesn't have the proper coverage it needs? Great, just change its typing altogether so that it doesn't need coverage moves against these certain Pokemon. Terra typing creates a coin flip duality, and because all 6 Pokemon can do it without needing a held item, it is absolutely beyond broken. Megas at least require the held item. Z moves at least require the held item. Dynamaxing can only be done to one Pokemon, and it just makes that Pokemon super big. Their typing's all the same, and their health just mildly increases and they have more powerful moves. Terras just completely alter the typing, and if you change to a type you already are, you get extra damage on top of the stab and whatever else that you already had, which is mind-blowing. However, what really carries this up is all of the story-based battles you go through are actually insane. The battle against Director Clavel, the battle against Arven, all of the battles against Nemona, all of the battles against the Elite Four, all of these battles are actually well crafted, and it seems like even with the random trainer battles, whoever was in charge of making the battles had an incredibly fun time doing so. Now, I do think that the fact that the Koraidon battle at the end of the game is effectively unlosable for you definitely docks us a bit of a point, because that's ridiculous that the final battle of the game is a guaranteed win. However, I'd like to note that the researcher that you battle, the robot of course, immediately makes up that point, and I think the battles for this game arguably deserve an 8 out of 10. I think there could be argument for a 9, maybe even a 10 out of 10, but I would like to note that I do not like the gimmick that you don't initiate a Pokemon trainer battle by looking them in the eyes. I know how much in this video I've talked about the lack of change, but this feels like such a big thing in Pokemon that you should just always be battled, but that's a weird thing to nitpick, so I'm not really going to dock points off of it. I just felt like bringing it up. But yes, I think that this game gets a crisp 8 out of 10 in the battles category. Only a handful of gym battles really felt like a sweep, and for the most part, all of the battles that I fought in this game were actually challenging, which in a Pokemon game is crazy. On to the next category. The gyms. This is another category that gets kind of scuffed, because obviously there's 3 different types of stories, and I'm going to include everything for the gyms, so the Titan battles and the Team Star battles are also included in the gyms category. Now, as I've noted when I was talking about the story, a lot of the gym locations don't really explain what type you're actually going against. Like Iono and Larry, you just sort of are in a restaurant or a random center area pool type dealio, but then there are some bangers like the Bug Gym and vice versa, the Water Gym, which kind of nail it on the head, so it's a bit of a mismatch. Hit it, don't hit it, it just really depends. But for the most part, throughout the entirety of this game, I was very much, engaged by the gyms. However, the Team Star bosses and the Titans kind of level on that brink of absurdity. I said before, yeah, it's not Sun and Moon, we're not being jumped, but the enemy Pokemon having unlimited PP and also a health bar the size of Saturn and everything going, a special move that buffs one of its stats, it becomes a little ridiculous to expect the average person to beat it without being somewhat over-leveled or just having the correct type on a whim. So, with that in mind, I'm going to give this game's gyms and structures and such a 4 out of 10, because with how many there are, you'd expect more of them to be right than wrong. Now, I'd like to note that the battles of them are challenging, but the gym category is on the aesthetic value of what they bring, not the challenge of the battles. The battles was the battle category, so hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, the visualization of a lot of the gyms, none of the puzzles make sense. Oh, grass type gym, go catch a bunch of Sunflora. Psychic gym, do yoga. What are we even, what? Then the yoga puzzle's terrible, by the way. So yeah, 4 out of 10, on to the next category. Pokemon selection. If you want to load up Cerebi or Wikipedia or anything of the sorts and go through the decks of this game, everything from Dogonzo and below absolutely carry this dex. Genuinely go look. This game came out recently, and I guarantee the only reason you remember Spidops is because of how terrible he is. Many of the new beginning Pokemon of this generation are absolutely terrible. And then, right near the end, they absolutely hard carry. Things like Keengamut, obviously Dodonzo, the legendaries and such, all hard carry this game. I'm destined to kind of split this right down the middle on a 5 and 10, but I'm going to bump it to a 7 out of 10 due to the amassed value of Pokemon. You can get all the Paradox Pokemon, all the other generations Pokemon being added in. Obviously, if you get the DLC, there's a lot more there in the bundle, but, you know, I'm not going to incentivize people to get a DLC in order to get Pokemon. However, it is a part of the Pokemon selection as far as I'm concerned. So, with this being one of the later entries, it's nice to see an entry finally start adding a large portion of the Pokemon, and as I said, it's really nice seeing how many Pokemon are actually added in this variation of Pokemon. So, they do a really good job at making sure to put a large amount of Pokemon everywhere. So yes, I will be leaving this category with a 7 out of 10, and being happy with that selection. I think it's really good for this generation of Pokemon. I just wish that there were more bangers out there. And mind you, I love Phalanx. He's actually one of my favorite fighting-type Pokemon, and even I can admit he's kind of underwhelming when you're looking at other Pokemon designs in comparison from the prior generations of Pokemon. Moving on to the next category. Overall, with this being the final notes of this video, I'm going to try to be as brief as I possibly can. I truly believe Generation 9 Pokemon is yet another victim of the Pokemon community not giving a game a fair chance. Are the graphics of this game absolutely abysmal? 100%. Not being able to render more than 3 Pokemon on a game that's only optimized for one system is ridiculous. If they ever make another open world Pokemon game like this again, I might actually hold my dollar because I assume that the visuals of this game will be horrific. However, the story of this game, the Pokemon, the battles, the variety, the difficulty, it's all every single Pokemon fan has been asking for the last, I don't know how many generations of Pokemon. Oh, I do. 8. This being the 9th generation. I'm so tired of the Pokemon community simply going new equals bad. New does not immediately equal bad. It definitely could become bad, sure, but nothing that the Pokemon Company has ever done has made us really feel the need to do that. I actually think DLC is the first step they've ever made in the wrong direction. So, with that being said, if you're one of those people who just mashed A through this entire game simply just to get through another Pokemon game, I think you should possibly reflect on yourself and think, do I actually still like Pokemon, or am I just getting it because it's one of my many obsessions? Because I used to be one of those people who just got every Pokemon game for the sake of it, but I had genuinely fallen out of love of Pokemon, and it took a lot of me to realize that and push away from the community. I actually only came back for Legends Arceus, which is why I'm so excited for Legends ZA, because it genuinely is a secondary game to the one I enjoy. Obviously, I had to go back and play all the other games to catch up, because I'm, addicted. But yeah, I think that this game deserves whatever rating it gets. Obviously, I tried to be as fair as I possibly could, but I think a lot of people that watch this video will be quite shocked by how high of a rating I actually give this game. Which, if that shocks you, I applaud you, or I can't think of the word off the top of my head, but I implore you to go and play the game for yourself. Genuinely. Give it another shot. Read the dialogue. Just enjoy the game. Don't put any pressure to finish it super quickly or use strong Pokemon. Catch whatever. Do whatever. It's more exciting than you think it would be. So, with that, I'm going to be dancing for the last time and then probably going to the outro of the video. So, I'll see you in the outro.